something to just put on in the background, sleep to, etc., etc. This video is great for any of that. And I'm just excited you're here. Thank you so much for stopping by. And before we get into it, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the channel's goal to be at 500,000 subscribers, so please subscribe. It'd be awesome for you to join the community, and just it helps out the channel a lot. And alright, anyways, without further ado, let's get into some spooky stories from Reddit. I saw something on the evening news that I can't explain. My work friends and I were out at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but, you know, cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around. Maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kind of keeping to themselves, sorta people you'd expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I'm sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse, the bartender, is kind of lazily flipping through channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen, which I register as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar though. "Hey Jess, can you switch that back?" I call out to her. The news comes back on, and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building, and it's burning. "Holy shit," I say aloud, enough for a few people to follow my gaze to the television. That's my apartment. The crowd in the bar falls kind of quiet. Everybody's staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor, property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. "Jesus, man," one of the coworkers says, that sucks." There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. "Yup," I agree just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to the reporter on the scene. He's standing a little further away, looking at the shops in the background. I can tell he's across the street in the northwest corner of the building. "Firefighters are expected on the scene any moment," he's saying, "and hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any further. As I was saying before, it's very unfortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded." "He's really laying it on thick," my other coworkers joked. I chuckle a bit. All things considered, at the moment it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on," the reporter on TV says. "We're getting some updated information. It seems..." Hang on one moment while we readjust the camera. The previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on the area of the building about halfway up on the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over, that's my place. I swore I turned that light out, I think at first. Then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera is zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch petrified as the camera zooms in closer. The reporter babbling out about the overlooked, ill-fated soul still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing, or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot, and everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air, back and forth, and then he's waving them up and down at the sides. Then he's banging both fists on the glass. Then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is to the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance, but everything is to the exact same rhythm, over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. "What in the fuck," I say, my voice a hoarse whisper. And then the camera gets a little closer, and finally we can make out the person's features. It looks almost exactly like me, It's wearing the exact same clothes that I'm wearing right now. Clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It also has its almost comical look of horror on its face.
Oh, quarantine, there he
I don't
is,
even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to be scared but as a joke.
Yeah,
It would
that's
have
a good
almost
game.
seemed funny if the circumstances were different,
I had 2 bricks
but
my team.
instead,
Like
it
2
was
hours
just
on the
extremely
game.
unnerving.
Oh,
No
well,
one in the bar
fucking
is
pretty
talking
close
now.
considering.
Everyone
I
is
don't get
fixed
how
on the
matchmaking
TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on the glass
Were
and
they
jumping in
silvers or were they?
circles.
No, they were
I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that the
2
firefighters
games of comp.
have rushed into
They
the
were the
building and are
second
now
game.
hiding on my floor. Oh God, I think. Without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stare transfixed at the screen. From this angle, you can just barely see the top of my front door through the window. Not too far behind where this creature is flailing around. Right now, it's holding its face in its hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly, the door behind it bursts open as presumably the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous, pointed teeth. Then, the lights go out.
There we
I
go.
sat there staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything as we all quietly pay our bill and leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire at my apartment and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they all had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on this subreddit know
Okay.
what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out the fire. I hope they let that whole fucking place burn to the ground. A conversation with a stranger on the bus. Huh? I asked, pulling off one side of my headphones. I said I like the boots, the man repeated. Oh. I had a bunch of pairs exactly like them for years and years. Good working boot, you know? Definitely are. I use them every day on the job. Where's that at? Turner Construction. Ah, yes, you're building that big old thing up on East Avenue, ain't ya? Yes, sir, it's gonna be one of the biggest in the city. So it seems. I used to do construction too, you know? That was way back in the day. I started back when my mom was probably a company or a freelance. My papa had a small construction and carpentry business. He hired me on when I was
What the
maybe
fuck
15
is
or
that?
so.
One
That was
shot
all
me in
the
the
way
fucking
back
neck.
in 1962. We built houses mostly, a couple small apartment complexes, nothing as big as what you're working on. Did you like it?
Oh,
Well, you bet your ass I did. Working all day was a free gym membership, ha! Plus all the perks that came with it.
Yeah, hey,
Perks? He smiled. Can you keep a secret, boy? Yes, sir. You ever play on a construction site as a child? When I was a little one, me and my buddies would sneak into houses being built and explore them. Maybe break a couple bottles here and there. Yeah, my neighbors and I used to do that when I was a kid. My house was one of the first built in the neighborhood. Then the rest came later. We probably explored every house in the block before they were finished. When they were just constructions. Maybe breaking a couple bottles too, to tell you the truth. Of course you did. Who wouldn't give me the opportunity? But that's all childish stuff. The real perks came later in life when I was an adult. Oh? Oh, yes, boy. Imagine this. The year is 1980 with no cell phone in sight. Talk to a pretty lady at the local bar and hit it off. You tell her about your new construction project, and she wants to go see it. Well, then you take her there. You and her all alone in a skeleton of a home, as you said. Wouldn't it be a little more private, like at your own house? More private, sure. Maybe, but much messier. I paused. How so? Well, you don't just take a girlie down to a construction site at night just to get your diddly fiddled with. You take her for,
There
you
you
know.
go, boys.
No,
Lightning,
I don't know.
green, yellow, stop by
for the easy disposal, boy.
Dog.
Disposal. Yeah, cut the girlie up or do whatever your preference is.
I got shot.
You do whatever you want to do with her. And you put her under the house. You bury her,
Definitely, man.
and your
Fuck
stained
off,
clothes
fuck
under
off.
there too. Once the job's done, no one ever see that stuff again. It's gone. Eventually, a brand new house is sitting on top of your deed. The bus rolled to a stop. Well, this is my stop. He stood, patted my shoulder, and I recoiled.
Nothing there, man.
He walked off the bus. The only thing running through my mind was a memory. I was a kid, no older than 6. My friends and I were playing hide and seek. I hid in the crawl space under my front
Bruh,
porch,
one's in that
and when
pocket,
I was
bruh.
hiding, I found a pair of
And mid, I
boots
can't
half
remember
buried in
what
the
it's
dirt.
Shit.
The exact same type of boots I was wearing on the bus. The exact same type of boots we'd found in the crawl spaces
Yeah, I knew it.
of every house in our neighborhood.
Top mid.
I work as a waitress at a diner, and I think one of our regulars might be the devil.
On bottom end.
I work at a rest stop diner in a town people pass through as quick as they can on their way to something or someone better. It's called Lucky's, which is a little ironic because if you've ended up here, you're anything but. If you stay too long, the dust settles. Working at Lucky's, you never see the same license plates twice, or faces for that matter. I've lost count of the amount of times the answers in mine.
Oh, one
Where you
short, one
heading?
short.
Anywhere but back. The lights flicker more often than not, and the jukebox sometimes spits out songs that aren't on the index cards. But the coffee's hot, and most people who try them say the pancakes are the best ones they have, and I'm inclined to agree. The embroidered name tag on my uniform reads Isabella, but that ain't even close to my real name.
I go for it. I go for
It
it.
was my mom's. She's been here a long time. I wear it because I was hearing her name said by other people. It's like she's still here, still coming up in conversation. Like she might walk through the door any second and isn't buried in the cemetery just past the strip club. Lucky's is also always open. Always. Working long shifts serving drifters and truckers and runaways. Those who have become impermanent out on the highways. You might get to know how to read people pretty quickly. When you move around that much, always on the road, you leave parts of yourself behind sometimes, lost between the miles. Sometimes, people are just driving because there's nothing else left to do. Working at Lucky's, I've seen all sorts of lost things. I once saw a man hit a deer with his truck and pull over to bury it in the red dirt, digging as the sun went down.
We spent power saw.
Tears a steady flow on his face as he fought the ground to cover up what he had done. I once had a man I recognized from the news leave me a blood-stained 20 as a tip, sad-eyed in a denim
Yeah, that's what-
jacket that barely hid the gun tape
Let's
to his
go,
let's
ribs.
That's clear.
I once saw a one-armed girl, no more than 16, stand up on the roof of her car and sing until a coyote came
When I met
and
up,
sat in front of
it's
the
you,
hood
bro.
for
Sorry.
hours long.
One tag,
I
two
once saw
tags,
two
same
women
man.
fist fight in the parking lot in the night outside, until one was spitting blood and teeth, and then they kissed in the blue lights of the police car that happened to pass them by. Faces lit up by red and shining.
Too much. Don't pick it.
I've seen the highway on fire, lines of flames between tires as the asphalt set itself alight in the heat. I've seen roadside baptisms, creature pulled up with a van in a kiddie pool. I've seen things walking down the desert just behind the reach of the neon sign for the motel that don't look quite like people, shifting out in the blue night.
Get a knife.
I met a woman who showed me a photograph of the place she was buried.
Obviously,
I often
didn't see
met
him, he
people
got knifed.
you can talk with a while
In the
until their
back.
face starts to flicker. Can't quite hold up the pretense that long. I've met people who have to be
That
invited
Rick- that
inside
Rick did
before they
shit.
can cross the threshold. I've met some lovely members of a
100%.
sacrificial cult who tipped well and were oh so polite, even when they asked me if I'd ever considered letting them harvest me. But this is a story about, well,
They smoke snipers.
you read the title.
I mean,
It was a Friday, and I was working a night shift. I prefer
Fuck,
nights
fucking
because when I
hell.
drive home, I pretend for a while that I'm going to follow the tail lights of the
Contact
car in
that
front
man
of
with
me until I leave everything in my rearview
I
mirror.
have my contact.
Until it gets light and the desert changes to ocean. Like if I rolled my windows all the way down,
He's
it
pulled
tastes salt
back,
in the
he's
air.
pulled back.
That, and I'm one of the only waitresses, shall we say, qualified to deal with the night customers. Besides, tips are always better when the moon is out.
Keep it.
We only have 3 true regulars in Lucky's, and only 2 that showed so
Exactly.
far. Rose, Mary, our first and most frequent regular, was sat by the window in her brown fur coat, always drawn about her shoulders, come rain or shine. Not that if it ever rained here. Her hair was long and white down her back, like the moon through a glass. She waved over to me, gracing me with a wink that made her crow's feet deepen, all the more beautiful for it. Rosemary liked whiskey in her tea. Sometimes she fed cake crumbs to the voodoo doll she carried in her pockets. She was also a chronic insomniac and liked the company of Lucky's when sleep was hiding from her. She continued to shuffle through the deck of cards she had already set up on the tabletop. I watched her thumbs flipping over 2 jokers. Rosemary liked to divine the future when she had the time. She used a frayed pack of hotel playing cards, and if she was in a good mood, she'd read you your coffee grounds. I didn't ask her too much because those coffee grounds had a startling way of coming true. Table 6 was empty and spotless as usual. It was the only table without a salt shaker, and the only one I never replaced a Coltree on. Only one person ever sat there, our second regular, Jones, who sat in his usual booth. Dregs of his black coffee held tight between his hands, badge resting on the table. He had his eyes closed, head bent down like he was repenting, steam curling off the lips of the mug and wrapping around his fingers. Jones was my favorite of our customers, not that I'd ever tell him. I walked past the booth and slid a bowl of sugar packets along the tabletop until it hit the mug with a soft thud. He jumped, reaching for his holster out of habit, until his eyes focused and he saw me. He smiled, embarrassed, and it changed his face, dragging him back to life.
Okay, man.
I can.
When he smiled, it was like a storm
Yes,
in a drought.
skip
Made you
that.
want to stand and watch, and maybe stay out in it just a little while longer. I wanted to put my hands over his, where they had resumed their place on the mug, to feel the second-hand heat through his palms. Sometimes I can sense the saddened people just by the feel of their skin. They carry it around with them, bone deep, trying to hide it from the world. But sometimes you lift it from them for a minute or two. If you have enough kindness to spare. It doesn't take much most times. Jones was too young to be that sad,
Probably
and yet tired today.
Palace.
I gestured with the coffee pot to his half-empty cup. Everyone knew about the little girl he pulled from the dumpsters outside the swimming pool last week. She was the 5th one missing in 3 months. I could tell from the shadows like purple thumbprints beneath his eyes. He'd been dreaming about her. She'd been found without her shoes on. He'd carried her to the ambulance in her socks, pink with little dots, small in his arms, like she was asleep. Lou the fry cook had cried when I told him that the other day. I really liked Lou. He was almost too big to fit through the service door, and had a tattoo of his dog just below the one of the angel of death on his shoulder. Lou sheds a tear for most things. The dead raccoons were always finding by the back door with their hands missing. Whenever there's a new missing poster plastered over the cracked glass of the phone booth in the parking lot. Every time he hears I Will Forever Hate Roses, when it decides to pop up on the jukebox.
Yeah,
Big
he's on
guy,
default in the corner.
bigger heart.
Yes, please,
Always tired, Jones said as I poured.
Right,
Another girl.
behind you.
As I poured, I made sure to brush his thumb where it rested
Sorry,
on
bro,
the
I was
top handle,
low-key
with
giving
the
you back
inside of
arms
my
in.
wrist, lifting up that sadness as far as I
Yeah,
could.
I don't know.
He
Call
smiled
that
up
corner,
at me,
bro.
shy, and I smiled back before I could stop myself.
Like safe corner.
I walked on to the next booth. 2 truckers with faces that had seen too much sun. One was showing the other the photos of his new baby in his wallet. He had tobacco-stained teeth, a scab on his cheek, and wind-chapped lips. And his smile was the most beautiful damn thing as he talked about his kid, lit up like Christmas morning. He showed me too as I refilled his coffee, and I stayed and talked to them for a while. The other trucker, with gold-backed teeth,
Smoke mid
told
off.
me how he'd used to drive pigs, but couldn't handle the guilt when he handed them over to the slaughterhouse. Said he'd look right into their pink faces through the slats, and their eyes looked right back. Right,
Good job,
leaving
man.
like he knew what he'd done. Said he still dreamt about them.
Come to me.
Now he drove freezers of seafood, specialty deliveries for fancy hotels. He'd never seen the ocean. Lou slammed the bell from the depths of the kitchen, and I got back to work. Taking orders from a woman with a Labrador who ordered hot dogs for them
Last
both,
was Palace.
and 3 teenage boys in their blood-stained varsity jackets in the corner,
Top mid.
who had
Top mid,
$10
top mid.
between them and asked for as many waffles as they could get. They often came in on full moons, leaving their bikes chained up in the parking lot. They were always hunting something.
Yeah, I mean,
Their
coming up a
baseball
bomb now.
bats,
I mean,
backpacks filled with bullets and Chinese guns.
Sorry, I thought this was
They were
Ah,
nice kids, so I always gave them extra scoops of ice cream. Besides, I knew they needed the energy, because when they were hunting,
Can I get a
they
drop,
had to run
please?
fast. Real fast. There used to be 4 of them. I cleared the table from the 2 women at the next booth on my way back. They looked to be twins, both dressed in long silk skirts and hiking boots, red hair piled up messy on top of their heads. Neither of them acknowledged me, not out of rudeness, but because they were too preoccupied, packing up their bags, overspilling with maps and notebooks. I spied a roll of duct tape and a bottle of vodka in there too, along with some stakes and crucifixes. They were deep in conversation, waving their hands, and I caught a little of it as it stacked their empty glasses,
Yeah, much Palace.
lipsticked
On
around
top,
the
man.
rims. I know where I buried him, Sylvia. You don't know jack shit. We took for hours and my mom always taught me eavesdropping was rude, so I left them to it and headed into the kitchen. But I got the sense that wherever they had left, whoever he was, he certainly wasn't there no more.
No one Palace,
I
Palace,
felt like
Palace.
telling them, but like my mom said,
He's
it's
just
not
gonna
polite
let
to
you go.
listen to other people's conversations. You never know what you'll wish you
Okay, man.
hadn't heard. Lou was dancing to the radio, swaying his hips to Sugar Hill as Dolly sang down the wires. He waved at me with the spatula he was using as a microphone.
Going to.
Carlos handed me a plate of pancakes. Carlos had worked here so long he'd known my mom, and was the only one who knew my real name. He sometimes came with me on the weekends to change the flowers on the grave. He always bought her desert flowers, growing from the same earth she was. Carlos was also the only one who knew the recipe for the Lucky's pancakes,
Thumbs down,
and the
please.
only one that could cook them right. On days when he wasn't working, we had no pancakes. Simple as. That was just the way it went. I learned that the hard way, but that's another story. Along with the pancakes came a woman. Back, he gestured through the doors. Table 6.
He's on.
Our
Oh,
final
okay.
regular had showed. It had been a while since he'd been around. I haven't even seen him come in, but that wasn't unusual. He moved in mysterious ways. I raised an eyebrow. Shit. Carlos raised one back.
Huge fucking
Oh,
job.
shit. He tossed me the salt with a grimace, and I filled the pockets of my apron. Lou banged around in one of the staff lockers for a moment until he emerged triumphant, waving a Bible that had definitely seen better days. He placed it on the counter next to the syrup jugs and flipped to a random page. We leant over his shoulders to read what it said. Keep far from a false charge. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. Lou shrugged and patted me on the shoulder. I don't get paid enough for
Hey man,
this
hey man,
shit.
hey man.
I took the pancakes to table 6, which had been empty the last time I looked. It was now very much occupied. The man sat at table 6 was smiling as I walked over,
Flashing high. Watch out.
if you can
Flashing
call
high,
it a
guys.
smile. It was more like
Out.
rictus, lips straining deep red at the corners of his face. His eyes kept darting from side to
Whoa.
side, too fast
Well
to
done,
count,
mid tank. Nice
like his
collateral.
pupils couldn't make up their mind where they should be. His hands shook as I got closer, hovering like flies on a carcass. I tried to lean as far away from him as I could as I placed the plate on the tabletop. But as I pulled my hands away, he darted his neck out fast, whipping his head up and tilted his face toward me. He sniffed in, hard, eyelids fluttering. He giggled, shrill like it was stuck on the roof of his mouth. I recoiled, trying to hide the urge I had to run back to the kitchen. There's something about hearing a grown man giggle. in a distinct tone. Can I get you anything? I asked, faking bright. I take your name. He gripped one of the pancakes in his fist, turning it to mush. I tapped the name tag on my uniform. He shook his head, grinning,
On my side.
shoulders almost
Last guy was
vibrating with
A-man,
his
he
strange
thinks he's
fluid
M4.
roll as his smile slipped for
His
a
abs,
second.
his abs.
Front teeth jutting suddenly, tongue sharply poking out. Filth was caked under his nails, red like the dirt on the sides of the road. Then he was smiling again, swaying slowly from side to side, feral in his hunting jacket. His hair hung in greasy strings around his ears, like
Alright,
blonde rat tails,
I don't see
and they
this going
swung
wrong
with
at all.
him back and forth.
I can, because we have no
Isabella.
close quarter engagement
Isabella.
capabilities.
I got it, bro.
Isabella, it don't suit. He suddenly slammed his hand up to his face, shoveling the crushed pancake into the gaping hole in his wine mouth. I jerked back, the movement was so sudden. I shoved my hands into my apron, reaching for the salt, and his eyes narrowed. There's no need for that, came a voice from behind me. It rolled across my shoulders, deep to the bone. Mr. Prince. I turned to face our third regular, relief mixing with fear and a swirling pit in my chest. Kind of like that feeling you get at a fairground in midsummer when you've been on a carousel too long. And part of you knows you need to get off, but the other part doesn't want to leave because you know as soon as you stand still, you're gonna be sick. Mr. Prince has an effect on people. Mr. Prince was dressed, as always, in his black pinstripe. His Stetson was darker than the night outside, and his boots shone like they
Yo,
were
this mid
lead.
tank is a fucking
If you
ball.
didn't notice the
Just
upside down
kick him.
crucifixes embroidered daintily onto his custom lapels, you'd think he was just a man with money, maybe mixed up in something a little shady like oil or pharmaceuticals. He was handsome by the way of his jaw, with his bone white smile, but his black sunglasses were balanced on the bridge of his nose, silver rimmed and gleaming, hiding his eyes as usual. When he spoke, it was a drawl, dragged up from the depths of the
This could
south.
be.
I'm sorry for my acquaintance.
Shuffle,
He's a
let's
little-
rush 1 minute.
Mr. Prince glanced at the man sat at table 6 as
1
he
minute on
panted
the
with
clock,
his
let's
tongue
rush.
hung out, like a dog.
About 40 seconds. from now.
Overexcited, Mr. Prince sat down, and the lights over the booth flickered,
Go 130,
tilted
go
his
130.
hat back on his head, and the jukebox coughed and
Back it low,
skipped,
noisy.
and suddenly, Robert Johnson was on and singing about that damn crossroad again.
I know
Mr.
it.
Prince popped a Marlboro red between his teeth and pushed the window open, a silver with the knuckles on his left hand. The silver piece of glass. Mr. Prince smiled, the way snakes do when they're watching you from the grass on their bellies. The cigarette was now smoking between his teeth, although he hadn't moved. Besides, Leroy needed to have salt. He's just a man.
Help me.
He looked him up and down in his top lip curl. He turned to Leroy.
Two bucket.
I see you started
Out,
off
one out.
pancakes, but what's the point
out,
of good food if it ain't for sharing? Leroy gave
It's a bit,
the
it's a bit,
eyes
it's a bit,
down
it's a bit,
that
it's a
Leroy
bit.
wanted to learn, and shook a little.
Nice.
Everything about Leroy made me nervous. Fight or flight getting ready to flood my system. Mr. Prance handed Leroy a menu. Order whatever you want. He leant forward and the lights flickered. Leroy ordered 4 cheeseburgers and a glass of milk. Well, if that's all, I managed. I could feel Leroy's eyes clinging to my back as I left. Rosemary waved me over before I could get back to the safety of the kitchen. I wouldn't worry about him, darling. She crossed herself, tapped the card on the pile. It had its eyes not by Rosemary. Printed that way for years. We won't be seeing him again. He wasn't talking about Mr. Prince. She cupped my cheek and I
Well
went deeper.
done.
Her hand rough with age but warm.
Good push.
I could tell she thought I looked tired. She paid for her tea and toast and walked into the warm night, waiting outside the doors. I finally made it back into the kitchen and was immediately attacked. Cold water doused me in the face and I threw up my arms on instinct, trying to protect my hair. Lou aggressively squirted me in the face with the spray bottle we also kept in the staff locker, the kind you use for tending houseplants. Ours was filled with holy water. Lou, Jesus Christ. Get off me, I sputtered, and he sprayed me again. I spat holy water out, dripping down the front of my dress and wiped it from my eyes, makeup running a little. I grabbed the bottle from his hands. I think I'm good. I wasn't really mad though, better safe than sorry, especially when it comes to possession. Sorry, just checking, Lou sheepishly handed me a dish towel. Already did me in, Carlos. He looked down at his shoes awkward. He was a foot taller than me and a decade older, and I hid my smile because he was twisting the toe of his back foot and forth like a little kid being kept after class. Carlos kept his eyes firmly fixed on his hands after he started flipping patties, but I could sense him holding back a laugh, desperately clenching his teeth. I narrowed my eyes and aimed the spray bottle at him. Maybe you need some more, I threatened. Lou snorted and then Carlos was laughing and I was too, and that heavy feeling that had hovered over us since Mr. Prince had walked in lifted. Sometimes when things get too dark, all you can do is laugh. Mom always said that when shit gets rough, you can either choose to laugh or cry. I never saw my mother cry. It was coming up on 3 in the morning as I took the burgers back to table 6. Leroy visibly drooled and clapped his hands as I walked over. I put the plate in front of him as quick as I could, but as I pulled back, his head darted forward and he licked the inside of my wrist. His tongue was long and wet against my pulse. I recoiled like I'd been bitten and he laughed, shrill and manic. You taste better than they will, he said, grinning and gesturing to the burgers. Mr. Prince watched this unfold, calm and unreadable like the sky before summer lighting burns down a tree. I frantically wiped my arm on my apron, but I could still feel that tongue on my skin as if it left my hand in his mouth. I fought off the tears that suddenly burned at the corners of my eyes because something told me Leroy would enjoy them just a little too much. I shuddered and cleared Mr. Prince's plate. Tell Carlos the banks were good as hell, he said, from behind his sunglasses. Then he chuckled, low and raspy, as if something he'd said was funny. He popped another Marlboro between his teeth and it started to glow. As Leroy shoveled meat down his throat, I tried not to gag as I watched it clog beneath his long nails. I walked by Jones on my
Short
back.
right now with AK.
He waved me over, eyes creased with worry. He ran a hand over his face as if he was trying to wipe all the bad things away. Is he bothering you? He gestured over to Leroy, who was rocking back and forth drinking his milk. Jones suddenly looked so tired. Uniform breathed on his face, looking 50 instead of his 22. Nothing I can't handle, I shook my head and thought about Rosemary. We won't be seeing him again. It felt like hours waiting for Leroy to finish. I took the order of a man with a butterfly tattooed on his neck, and some truckers pouring Jim Beam into their coffee. They asked me for an extra cup, which they placed at the empty seat on their table. We're absent friends, they said. I cleaned down the countertop, restocked the sugar packets, and took out the trash, ignoring the man in the rabbit mask that often waits out by the dumpsters. As long as you don't look at him, you don't bother him. I refilled coffee cups and took the orders of the large group of biker girls that came. leather-clad and low-bearing. At 3:03 a.m., Mr. Prince stood. Leroy had licked his plate clean and was sitting there, staring up at him with his teeth bared in a smile, hands gripping the tabletop so hard his knuckles were going white as milk. Mr. Prince handed me a roll of bills wrapped in black cotton. I knew better than to count. He tipped his hat. See, Leroy? We all gotta pay eventually, he said. He leaned in and spoke softly. For I will not acquit the guilty. He smiled. He held out his hand to Leroy, palm flat waiting. Leroy's hand shook as he reached into the hunting jacket and pulled out a pair of shoes. A child's shoes, small enough that both could fit in one hand. Little pink sneakers, dirty, with brown stains on the toes that I knew could only be one thing. Mr. Prince considered them a moment, under the lights, and shook his head. He seemed like he was sorry before he handed them to me. For your man over there, tell him to dig deeper where they looked last. He nodded to Jones, who was watching us, his badge gripped in his hand. But Jones knew better than to come over. Mr. Prince turned to Leroy and grinned around his cigarette. We've got a ways to go. The road we're taking. They say it pays us good intentions. He chuckled, and I felt sick to my stomach. He took Leroy's hands like a child, and they walked out into the night, warm and waiting. The doors swung shut behind them, even though nobody had touched them. The jukebox sputtered.
I loved it. I loved it.
I placed the shoes on the table by Jones' empty coffee cup and passed on the message. He sat still for a long time after, just watching them on the tabletop, trying not to cry or scream or punch a hole in the plaster. All I could do was refill his coffee because when someone is trying to hold themselves together like that, there's nothing left to say. My shift ended and I drove myself home, following the taillights in front of me. I knew when I woke up, it would be dark. It would be time for my next shift. But for now, I just drove, drinking and watching the sun come up. Come to Daddy. You'd probably be surprised at the number of bodies one can find out in the desert.
God, bitches.
You'd probably be even more surprised at how often people play with bodies. But I don't know. Since most of us are tweakers or disadvantaged youths doomed to repeat the mistakes of their alcoholic mothers and abusive fathers,
Last was short.
maybe you wouldn't be surprised at all. My best friend Cameron found last winter's corpse du jour, an old man in a dilapidated trailer. A white beard matted with gold shoes hung past his bony knees, so Cameron bought him a Santa hat from the Dollar Tree and christened him Satan Claus. Satan Claus was a popular attraction among the high desert's underbelly until Gidget Lagoon blabbed to her brother, who was a deputy sheriff. This pissed Cameron off. He didn't grow up here, so he didn't understand the rules. There's always a snitch, there's always a whiner, there's always a freak, and there's always someone who fantasizes about killing you. Even if he understood, he never had believed that I was both a freak and the person who fantasized about killing him. I've known Cameron since we were teenage patients at a county psychiatric facility. It was the first time in our lives either of us had security or structure. I miss it, honestly. We moved in together as we could. For the record, we aren't lovers. We never even experimented. I couldn't separate sex from trauma and didn't particularly want to try, so I was voluntarily celibate. This enchanted Cameron because he has a Madonna/whore complex the size of Babylon. I was his pure, unsullied princess. This is why he paid half my bills, supported me emotionally, and asked nothing in return. That's not to say he didn't have sex. Cameron was a bona fide man whore. That's the only reason he wants to raves and parties. The girls. We were at just such a party the night I met Daddy. The party was in a bashed up warehouse that smelled like roadkill and alcohol. Cameron stayed glued to my side for a while, I guess to make sure no one else was souped in to fuck his Madonna off her pedestal.
Alright, bet. I'll
But
make
it didn't
noise.
last.
Watch this.
It never does. A girl I recognized vaguely, waist length black hair, and makeup you could scrape off with a putty knife, was eyeing him ostentatiously. I thought it was disrespectful to the untrained eye. Cameron and I were a couple after all. Now, Cameron was drunk by this point. He gets handsy when he's drunk, even with me. So I cuddled up and wrapped myself around him. He was adorable. Cuddling doesn't break the Madonna pedestal. It just makes him feel special. But I messed up. We were sitting in the corner, starting to play around. He was looking at me in a way no one else ever does, bright and warm and hopeful, like I'm the most important person in the world. I could feel myself teetering on the edge of the pedestal. Then he leaned in to kiss me. I panicked. Before I knew it, I was running. I pretended I was flying, that I'd dash outside and leap into the air, taking flight among the mad whirl of constellations. I could almost see it, the warehouse shrinking as I gained altitude, the night wind cooling the sick heat inside me. For a mad moment, felt the feathers spreading from my skin, itchy and hard and growing fast. I made it outside and halted. No feathers, no flight, no night wind scraping the broken
coming from
sky away. No time coming around me. The night's chill had settled into my bones and I was shivering. Only when he tapped my shoulder did I realize I'd been crying. I wiped my eyes hastily and turned. The black-haired girl lingered several feet away. She had a small smile, halfway between anxious and satisfied. Hey, Cameron slurred slightly. Demetria and I are leaving. Will you get home okay? Her name's not Demetria, I said in a bored-as tone as I could muster. Brittany. All at once, he looked a lot less drunk. You know her name doesn't matter, don't you? He stared at me for what felt like a terribly long time. He was waiting for something, I knew it. But I couldn't give it, even if I could. I'd stop mattering the second he got it. Don't keep her waiting, Cameron. His face somehow drew upward, then fell into a flat smile. He gave me a half and left with Demetria. He counted 1,000, then went back inside. A humid rush of sweat, piss, and beer burps crashed over me like a wave. The crowd writhed and squirmed like maggots. Music blared. Bargaining. It all seemed so pointless. Nothing was ever be accomplished here on any night. I looked down at the floor. Amid the chewing gum, spilled drinks, gasoline stains, I saw 3 words written in black Sharpie. Come to Daddy. An arrow underneath pointed east. I looked up at the pointless party, and I thought of Cameron, of the way he looked at me. He'd be given that look to Demetria just now. I followed the arrow. Halfway across the warehouse was another message and another arrow. Keep coming. I followed it to the back wall, to another Sharpie message. Hurry, Daddy's waiting for you. This arrow was absurdly long, and pointed to a bland door I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. I opened the door. Cold, foul air swept over me. I gulped a deep breath. It was preferable to the sweat and heavy humidity behind me. Before me was a set of rickety metal stairs. I descended and found myself rewarded with another message. Daddy's coming through the back. I turned into a low concrete corridor, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Something came into view at the other end. Bony, huddled, and terribly small. A body. Its head lay tilted against the wall, open jaw yawning up at the ceiling. Overhead, painted in streaky letters, Daddy. An oil drum sat next to Daddy. I withdrew, gagging, when I saw the half-rotten sludge of dead vermin at the bottom. A nightstand sat on his other side, bearing a plastic container
Eco
filled with
with
Hershey Kisses.
rounds 10,
A
11.
hand-lettered sign read,
10 or 11.
"Give Daddy a kiss." This crazy bullshit was enough to salvage the night.
I want to see.
Smirking slightly, I unwrapped
See
the
us
kiss
going
and
big.
popped it into Daddy's
I
gaping
like us
mouth.
going big.
A second later, he shuddered and began to chew. His head lolled weakly. With a heavy grunt, he flopped forward so that his eye sockets were trained on me. Something glinted within, dark and iridescent like dirty oil. He swallowed the kiss and spoke. What do you want from me? Terror and mirth rolled together in a vacuum tornado. What? He lurched forward, desiccated body on concrete with a clatter. I can give you one thing. Any one thing. What shall it be? I thought about it. I really did. If wish granting, Hershey-loving corpses exist, might as well take advantage of the wish. Except I didn't know what to wish for. I didn't want it normal. I didn't want another life. Why bother when I barely live? I couldn't have anything. The after premise was not before that would ever be a possibility. I didn't want money. I didn't want a house. I didn't want a better job. All of these are changes.
Should go.
At some point, every change causes pain. I've had enough pain for a lifetime. I don't know, I said. Daddy's dark eyes flared. That does complicate things. He smiled, papery skin cracked and split like porcelain varnish. And it makes them interesting. Give me a rat. He pointed to the vermin mound. I need protein. It didn't occur to me to resist. exist. This was the first time in memory that I actually felt alive. I snatched a mushy tail from the morass. Only half a rat emerged, melting into translucent rot before my eyes. I tossed it to Daddy, who lunged like a spaniel and caught it in his mouth.
Beware.
He swallowed it whole and said, "Show you the deep desire to give it to me." Why? Because I can. This was the only justification I recognized. The only one I could see. The only one that made sense. Then do it.
From
Not that
fucking where?
energy. More rats?
One
Well,
ticket.
of a kind, he chuckled. But not exactly. He watched me expectantly. Those sockets glinted madly. The sound and several I couldn't describe. Music thumped from upstairs, losing trickles of dust and reverberating in Daddy's lair. I don't get it. People. I need people, or rather, parts of people. Skin, eyes, hair, livers. I eyed him suspiciously, wondering just how fast this monkey's paw motherfucker could run. You could get all of those from me. You're my client. Clients pay the provider's price. You pay this provider's price in bodies. I need 2 eyes, 2 lungs, 1 stomach, 1 liver, 1 skin. He continued, rattling off seemingly every organ in his body. Then he finished. Each must come from a different person. I contemplated this briefly. You'll show me what I want. Something, I added silently, that will make me happy. I swear on my name. Which is, he wagged a finger. Sorry, darling. Names are power here, but on oath upon my name, spoken or otherwise, is unbreakable. I watched him. He smiled widely. The thin remains of his mummified skin split and flaked off like snow. Under the lights, he looked like a cross between a Halloween decoration and a bad Photoshop project, except for his eyes. Those dark, writhing masses of nearly hidden color. I turned around and went back up to the party. Almost immediately, I spied a long, shimmering curtain of black hair across the floor. For a triumphant moment, I thought it was Demetria, but no. She resembled Demetria, though, and that was enough for me. She wandered around nervously, a tragically overgrown little girl. I pretended I was her ride home, and led her downstairs. Daddy warped and shuddered and grew into something that blotted the lights, something I couldn't look at without panicking, and swallowed her whole. I kept my eyes closed until Daddy cleared his throat. He'd grown skin, thick and fleshy, lipless. It reminded me absurdly of a squashly upholstered sofa. Dull, cracked teeth glinted in the recessed mouth. Will I have more tonight? I got Daddy a stomach, 2 eyes, and a liver before the night was done. I chose dirty, dusty men, the kind that looked as if they'd been sucked dry. Homeless tweakers, people who, for all intents and purposes, have already disappeared. I know how sick it is, but please try to understand. The only things I ever feel are fear and panic, and that only happens when someone touches me unexpectedly. Can you imagine what it's like to be dull and empty like a reptile? Except when you're accidentally triggered into reliving the worst moments of your awful life? I'd have given anything to change that. Anything to have something that would make me happy. So I fed Daddy people that no one would miss. It's easy to find them if you know what to look for. Men with sucked-in faces who ride children's bicycles, women with nice bodies and ancient haunted faces, dust-caked teenagers and old men sleeping under tarps in the desert. It took a month. In that month, Cameron began to date Demetria. She spent more time in my apartment than I did. After I walked in on her blowing him after a long shift, I went to my room and started to pack. I don't have much, so it didn't take long. Cameron caught me as I dropped the last bag in the trunk. His eyes were wet. She doesn't mean anything, he said. I slammed the trunk shut. Then that makes you a shitbag, Cameron. Tell me to dump her. I'll do it. I'm not your mommy. He ran his hands through his hair. His lips started to tremble. Loathing exploded through me. You're the most important person in my life. Only because I can't be. I climbed into my car and drove off. After a couple of brutally cold nights under the stars, I moved into the warehouse with Daddy. He sang lullabies and fed me Hershey Kisses from that dirty plastic bowl. No matter how many I ate, the bowl never emptied. Daddy didn't expect conversation, affection, or any attention at all. All said and done, it was relief. I still went to work, of course. Cameron came in every night. I felt a cruel surge of triumph wherever he wandered in. He still looked at me, as he always had, like I was the only person that mattered. Then Demetria followed him. The fight was a truly spectacular example of a white trash beatdown. He and Dimitri were banned, and I got written up. It didn't really bother me. That night, I found a raggedy fat man in foul-smelling clothes out behind the restaurant. I told him he could stay at my house if he wanted. He was slow, childlike, and took me at my word. Daddy ate him up quickly and spit the bones into the rat barrel. Then he burped, enormous fleshy cheeks beating like sails in the wind, and sat down. We're almost done, he said. Only one body left. I did a quick calculation. 2. A heart and a brain? He chuckled indulgently. I've had a brain all this time. All I need is a heart. By this time, Daddy looked like a cross between Nosferatu, Frankenstein's monster, and a Picasso painting. Pale, fleshy, and muscular, with ridiculous Fabio hair and a thick, indecently red mouth that didn't quite fit his skin. He had only one green eye and one brown eye. In place of whites, that murky, oily rainbow continued to swirl. I'll find it tonight, I told him. He hesitated theatrically. There's a special rule from the heart. My skin tightened. I need your heart. My pulse beat slow and heavy in my throat. That's against the rules. He laughed. You misunderstand. I don't need this. He tapped my chest. Tired little muscle. I need your heart. Only it's inside someone else. What? I asked levelly. Are you talking about? A heart that is yours is a heart that loves you. You mean Cameron? He smiled and nodded. I almost left. But why? Cameron doesn't really love me. He loved his illusion, his pure little princess. Someone he couldn't touch, someone who was too good to be touched. It was a paradox. The moment he got what he wanted would be the moment he lost it. But he could help me get what I wanted. If he really loves me, that would make him happy. Wouldn't it? I drove to my old apartment and knocked. Cameron answered the door, smelling like dirty clothes and whiskey. His eyes went wide when he saw me. Then he started to cry. She's gone, he said. I'm so sorry. I've got nothing to be sorry for. I came inside, held him. He got handsy. I let him. Maybe because I was expecting it this time, or maybe because there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. It was okay. Not enjoyable. My heart raced and I felt sick. And he was too intoxicated to do a whole lot. But he was gentle and careful. He got what he wanted. Before he could realize that he knocked his angel off his pedestal, before he could take my heart away, I talked him into a drive. The drive to the warehouse was the happiest I'd ever seen him. I led him through the warehouse, pausing every minute or two for a hug or a kiss. That was fine. It was good to make him happy. Quid pro quo. Only when he saw Daddy, hulking and grinning under the fluorescent lights, did Cameron realize that something was wrong. Daddy stood up. He looked awful, 9 feet tall and completely wrong. A hybrid of every childhood nightmare. Get back, Cameron told me. Daddy charged. Cameron shoved me towards the stairs. I felt his hand on my back, felt his pulse beating through his wrist for a fraction of a second. Then Daddy grew, bolting the legs, bones creaking and cracking as he exploded into something I couldn't comprehend. And then, like all the others before him, Cameron was gone. My heart began to pound from grief or excitement. I couldn't tell. We're done, I said. So where is it? Where is what? Daddy stretched luxuriously. What I want. I could feel my blood pressure rising. The thing I want. You mean the deepest desire of your heart? Yes. He grinned and dropped to his haunches, posing like a runner about to take off. Here it is. He took a deep breath. The stillness was excruciating, poised overhead like a crushing weight. Then Daddy opened his mouth and threw up, bloody and foul, full of shattered bones and flesh. It flooded toward me like a tide, and floating within it, a pale crown jewel, was Cameron's head. Daddy gurged up a final outpouring of viscera and settled back. There it is. My skin prickled and stung. I thought of feathers, small and hard and piercing the skin as they forced their way up. I turned and ran. I did not fly through the air, but I flew across the sand. Stars lit my way, a million eyes glazing the desert in silvery darkness. Sometime around dawn, just as gold and red bloomed across the horizon, I tripped and fell. I remember watching the sunrise. Then everything went dark. Cameron found me. When we got home, he helped me into the shower. I sat blankly as dust and dried blood skirled around the drain. After 20 minutes, he helped me out and put me to bed. I fell asleep quickly. I woke around mid-afternoon. Sun streamed through the window. Cameron slept beside me. His shirt was hiked up halfway over his back, revealing what looked like a tattoo. I lifted his shirt, half expecting to see Dimitri's embellished name, and froze. Not a name, not even a tattoo, just 7 words written in black Sharpie. Give Daddy a little more credit, honey. You're going to notice a woman in your home. You must ignore her. It was December of 1999 when she infested our quiet Midwestern home. My father called for me from downstairs. I assumed it was time for dinner. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs and had his hand up in an effort to keep me from coming down. The moment I saw the panic in his eyes, I knew something was wrong. I want you to listen to me very carefully, he said. My heart started to race as he continued. It's very important that you keep your eyes on me. You're going to notice someone else in our home, but you must ignore her as much as possible. I almost started laughing, my 12-year-old mind trying to comprehend what he was getting at, assuming this was some sort of out-of-character joke. Before I could respond, he continued. She's going to whisper things, follow you, and whatever else she can to get your attention. It's going to be very difficult, son, but you must never interact with her. I promise she will leave, but only if you pretend she isn't there, and try not to think about her. Promise me. There were so many things I wanted to ask him, but I was too frightened and confused. I managed to spit out, okay, Dad. All right, come downstairs, it's time for dinner. Hurry, I've made her stronger just by telling you, but I had to. I can't afford you looking at her by mistake. Trust me. Now stay focused, he barked. I did as I was told and slowly crept down the stairs, keeping my eyes glued to my father's as he backpedaled into the kitchen. I felt the temperature drop significantly as I reached the first floor. I smelled a familiar, sickening, and sour scent in the air. It reminded me of the time I raccooned dead in our wall and stunk up the house for a whole week. My father and I sat down at the table at the same time. My sister was across from me. Her head hung and her eyes stared at the empty porcelain plate in front of her. My mother pulled a casserole out of the oven. Her eyes were swollen and tear-stained. I kept my focus on my family, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see a blurry mess of dark, matted hair and sickly gray skin. There was no energy in the kitchen, drained of all the warmth and laughter that usually accompanied our meals. My sister grabbed my knee under the table and whispered, "Can you see her too?" I nodded. "Quiet," my father hissed. The woman walked forward with wet, cracking footsteps. The smell was nauseating. She crept towards the table, stopping directly behind my sister, only a few inches away, and rested a decrepit hand on her shoulder. She winced in fear and stared at me. I immediately put my head down. My mother served our dinner, doing her best to pretend as if everything was okay. I could see my father clutching my sister's hand underneath the glass table in an attempt to keep her from completely losing it. My sister spent the entire dinner with a skeletal hand on her shoulder. Nearly inaudible whispers spewed from the woman's mouth and filled the room like white noise. And that's how we lived for months, doing our best to live a normal life despite the ever-present, unwanted guest. Even if we left the house, she would somehow able to follow us all. Whenever the 4 of us were in the car, she could be seen in the rearview mirror or standing on the side of the road. My parents didn't let anyone visit, and never let us stay at friends' homes during the months of hell. We were able to whisper to one another when it was absolutely necessary to discuss her presence, if she wasn't too close. My father made us promise to never tell anyone. That was the only way to quarantine her, the parasite of attention. We concluded that she infected a single household at a time, unable to be seen by anyone outside the home unless their mind had been tainted with the knowledge of her existence. I learned a few years later that my father was the reason for her arrival. His sister, back in the 70s, had been infected from another, and it followed my aunt into their home. In 1999, for whatever reason, my father struggled to keep the thought of her at bay. In turn, he brought her back into his life, and ours. We kept the promise of keeping her a secret from others, and it was the hardest thing we've ever done. All of us tried leaving the house as a group, and she followed. We couldn't bring ourselves to break our family apart. It was hardest for my mother, who was stuck alone with her while we're at school and my father was at work. Everything changed the day my mother broke. It was a snowy February night. We had finished dinner and my mother decided to go to bed early. She was sitting on their bed, making herself almost impossible to ignore. My mother couldn't take it. I heard her screaming from the bedroom, demanding that she leave us alone. My father sprinted upstairs to try and stop her. That was the last I ever saw of my mother. A pool of blood on the white carpet was all that remained. The woman was still there, but my mother was gone. In the following week, she whispered to me. She told me I could see my mother again. All I had to do was look and ask how. I never did. The reason I am telling you is because I want you to think about her. I saw her again this morning, for the first time in 18 years. I cannot afford to lose my wife or children to the parasite. I need you to think about her dark hair and gray skin. Think about her in your home, so that she may leave mine. You're already infected, and eventually, you're going to notice a woman in your home. You must ignore her. It's for your own good. I'm so sorry.
This is what we have been working for.
My mom left me a set of tapes to watch after she died. My mom was the sort of person to look like a wallflower until you got close and then spout out facts about her favorite animal. It was an emperor penguin. She said their journey for love and parenthood was the hardest and most connecting with her. I'm told all the usual things about her. She had a smile that could light up a room. Her laugh cut through the molasses of an awkward party. Her stride was confident and her form was elegant. From the day I could understand what it was to be remembered, she was painted to me as a true goddess. After all, aren't all moms supposed to be that to their children growing up? Mom died when I was 4. Aggressive cancer riddled her body with tumors, stole her stride, her smile, her laugh, everything in just 18 short months. I didn't see her for much of it, but if I did, I obviously didn't remember. I heard somewhere we don't start forming memories until we're about 2 years old, and implicit memories, those unconscious memories that stick with us automatically, aren't even until we're 7. So essentially, my mother was already dead for 3 years, before I could even unconsciously think of the word mom and go to her face. A face that was stolen from me. A face that I'll never see. I'm giving you this background information now because it's vital that you understand my mom before we get into the thick of it. I can't sit here and tell you I love my mom unconditionally. I didn't know her. Dad was never in the picture, so grandparents were where I was shipped off to. Good people. Kind people. They raised me on stories of my mom and made sure to do the one thing she'd requested when her sickness finally got her. Show Nick the milestone tapes. For those unaware, a milestone tape is something where a loved one, usually a parent, records a loving video to congratulate their kin on a moment they're missing out on. First day of school, marriage, you get the picture. I remember being 5 years old. I'd not long tripped on the stairs after miscalculating the steps and smashed my front teeth on the top step, sending my first baby tooth flying. Thankfully, the pain was short-lived in my mind. I was mere days from my birthday, and a surprise trip to Disneyland was coming up. In the middle of packing, I was sat down in front of the TV with my grandpa Molly and him putting in the pristine discs. A gaudy logo flashing up on the screen still burned into my retina to this day. Gone, but not deleted. A video message from Lenora Standowski. The image would flicker for just a moment, always just a moment each time. Then she'd appear. A young woman sat in a black leather armchair with a small table to her side and patterned wallpaper behind her. She was in her late 20s with raven black hair tied in a messy bun. Strands curled and dangling down her porcelain face, a beauty mark sitting just beneath her right eye. The pair of them shining like emeralds that caught the first ray of sunshine. Black lipstick gave way to shimmering teeth and a smile that made even an oblivious little me feel lost. Hi, Pumpkin. I hope my little prince is watching the throne while I'm away. How can you be nearly 6 years old and already losing your baby teeth? You're growing up too fast, little man. She puffed out her cheeks and she feigned a frown before giggling. My heart sank in my chest. I knew something wasn't right, even then. Her tone was playful, buoyant, and full of joy, like she'd never missed a moment of my life. Put your tooth under your pillow tonight. Dada Molly will make sure the tooth fairy comes and nothing else. She raised a single finger with a ring, posing for a moment before her face fell. Her posture sank, and she fell back into the armchair it had, growing smaller as she coughed. After a moment, she cleared her throat with a quiet dignity and made sure the hand she coughed into went out as a shot as she looked at the camera with a weak smile. Mommy loves you, my little crown prince. Close your eyes and breathe with me. I looked at my grandfather and with tears streaming down my face and a bite on his lip, put a hand on my shoulder and nodded. I did as I was told and took a long breath in, the air cold and filling my lungs, intoxicating me as I heard her words. The same words I'd come to hear at the end of every video she recorded. I'll always be with you. And so it went. For every milestone I undertook, there was an accompanying video. When I graduated middle school, when I rode my first bike, even when I broke my first bone, she had a video ready. I was around 11 when biking home from school, I collided with a speeding driver. The bastard didn't even stop as my small body careened over his windscreen, rolled over the hood and smashed into the concrete, tearing my right arm to pieces. Passerbyers said it was a freak accident, that the car just appeared out of nowhere and then vanished. But hell, what do hidden drivers do? Speed, speed, speed. Medicated up to my eyes and sitting up in the hospital, Grandpa handed me a mini DVD player and the familiar face shot up. I can never tell you in these earlier videos if those were done back to back or months apart, but Mom still looked radiant, albeit with more coughing in each iteration. Hi Pumpkin, it's Mommy. Though I'm sure by now you're probably cringing at the mere mention of me referring to myself that way. Oh God, do people still say cringe? It's hard to know when the world you're in is like anymore, but moms are never supposed to be cool, are they? She chuckled, a faraway look in her eyes, the pit of my stomach expanded. No, I thought, tears in my eyes, gripping the sheets with my good hand. I want you to say those things. I want you to embarrass me. Well, if you're watching this, then you've broken your first bone. I hope it's a bit later in life and not when you're so upset you can't even hear me, but sweetie, this is an important life lesson that I wanted to be there for. Pain happens. It's a part of our world and everyone in it must experience it. Sometimes it's physical, like now when your body hurts so much that you want to yell and cry out. Sometimes it's emotional, which you get when someone upsets you, hurts your feelings, something you might also feel from seeing my face right now, which I'm sorry for. She trailed off, that weak smile plastered across her face like the greatest lie ever told. She took a breath, and I heard the quivers in her voice, both from sadness and from sickness. But you're my little crown prince, and while you're watching the throne, I know you'll do great things and overcome anything that stands in your way. You know why? Why, I breathed, my body radiating with hot pain but my heart aching. I leaned in, as she leaned in, like sharing a secret only we would ever know. Because you're my son, and my love for you will push you to do anything. She whispered, my face involuntarily growing into a smile without even realizing. Just don't look at the wall behind me. My eyes were fixed on hers, a small sliver of the background visible behind her ear. As my eyes slowly broke from her gaze and traveled over, she spoke again. Don't. A frantic whisper escaped her lips. My eyes snapped back as a pale shade shifted out of my sight. Blinking once, I saw she was sitting back in the chair, talking as if nothing had happened. Had I dozed off? I was on high pain medication. It wasn't impossible. I'm running out of time. They're only supposed to be short, so Mommy loves you, my little crown prince. Close your eyes and breathe with me. Again, I did as instructed and heard a distinct creaking sound from the speakers. Undoubtedly her sitting into her chair. I'll always be with you. So the years went, fewer milestone videos popped up. Some of them were simply mundane or not that noteworthy. Not why we're here, but the usual events. First day as a freshman, last day as a senior, prom night, and even an embarrassing one wherein a 17-year-old me had the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of being explained dating etiquette and safe sex by my long-gone mother. By the time I'd reached 21, only 4 tapes remained. Grandpa Mahali had passed and Grandma Souza was getting on, so they were given to me with the obvious instruction to not watch them until the time was right. And this is the part where things take a turn. A bad breakup, bad life choices, even worse friendship choices with substances readily available, a lifetime of insecurities stemming from and no parental figures, all the love in the world to my grandparents, but it's not the same, and a series of videos from your long-dead mom are enough to fuck anybody up. So I grabbed a bottle, some pills, and put on the next video, planning to binge them before I took my leave. I mean, fuck it. What's the harm if I'm ending it all, right? The video flickered and cast a long shadow across my dismal apartment before the visage of my mom came into focus. It'd been a couple years since the last video, and in my emotionally unstable, drunken state, I was not prepared for what I saw. Emaciated, sunken eyes and a slack jaw, her tongue hanging out and dropping to the bottom of her chin, thick, pungent saliva, with her concave chest heaving under the weight of the oxygen machine wrapped around her face, a looming shadow with two bright blue orbs for eyes and jagged pillars for teeth, wrapping its arms around her. It locked eyes with me and cocked its head to the side. New, it croaked, my skin bubbling with fear and chilling my blood. I'd never felt a horror like it. It felt like it knew me and saw into me. I recoiled, and in my cocktail of fear and horror, retched up everything I'd downed not 10 minutes earlier. A torrid mixture of bile, acid, pills, and booze spread over my carpet as tears ran down my face. My stomach ached and every cell in my body screamed at me in protest. The thoughts swirling in my thick skull were that of disappointment, disgust, and repulsiveness. I felt weak, alone, and broken as I collapsed onto the floor in the fetal position, sobbing, "Sweetie, it's Mom." Through blurred eyes and a haze of pain, I looked at the TV, half expecting some emaciated creature to lurch through, but there was my mom. She looked tired, her hair now matted to her head and exhaustion racking her bones, but beauty radiating through her as she held her hands in her lap and leaned forward, smiling. If you're watching this, then things are bad. I don't know how bad, but I can guess. Grandpa wouldn't have let you watch this if you'd gotten your heart broken, or at that age where emotions are as high as a kite and just as volatile. So I can assume that, much like me, you're in a bad place. She coughed, and I felt the need to sit up and gave her my full attention. This woman, no more than 6 years my senior, frozen in time, still finding ways to command my attention with her every word. It was like I was 5 again. "Sweetie, I know I can't talk to you like a child anymore, so I won't. Honestly, I'd been so excited to see you grow up. Go through that phase where we argue over small things before finally setting in the longest and most beautiful phase of our family dynamic." I watched her lips quiver and eyes glaze over, my own mirroring as she shakily concluded. The one where we're best friends who always look out for each other. That broke me. Every emotion I trained myself to hide away when kids started asking questions I couldn't answer, situations I'd wanted my mom in, moments I felt alone. I let it out in one volatile instant of self-healing, the words on that tape echoing in my head long after it stopped playing. The road ahead will be tough without me. It was always going to be. But you're the crown prince and you'll eventually have that throne. Survey your kingdom and know you can do anything and conquer anything. It's getting closer now, but we still have some time left, so don't let whatever is going on beat you, nor the thing after that. The penguins, didn't they? Did they? I'm sure Grandpa told you, but they're my favorite. Those little bird share the burden of parenthood. Walk over 100 miles and nearly starve to cultivate new life. I'd do it all that and more for you, honey, because she closed her eye, and I did too. Without prompting, we said it together. I'll always be with you. It took time to get better. All things do. I would spend so many nights in withdrawal with my shakes, vomit, and staring up at a horrific beast looming over my head, like the thing on the TV but foggier. I'd imitate my movements and try to get closer. With every step, its eyes would glow just a bit brighter. Everything else remaining shrouded in darkness, even if light passed through my curtains. I don't know how I made it through that time of my life. One night, as it made its way to the foot of my bed, I closed my eyes and breathed on instinct, reciting my mother's mantra.
Bro, Granny, are you gonna
In
like
those
fucking
moments of
shoot him?
crisis, we turned to our most personal coping mechanisms, and I wasn't about to go back to the bottle. When I finished, it was gone. Over the years, I completed my program, got clean, and went through therapy to cope with grief. When I hit 26, I met the second most important woman in my life, Natalie. She knew what it was like to go through pain, to go through suffering alone, to play with the wrong demons. We fell in love, we got engaged, and eventually married. As she had been countless times before, Mom was there to congratulate us. Natalie had seen some tapes, but this was her first one that, in its own way, was directed to her. Mom was nearing the end by this point, her thin frame barely clinging to her always beautiful dresses, and her skin beginning to stretch like paper. She took great gulps of air from the oxygen tank before talking, but somehow retained that exuberance she'd always had. "I knew you'd find someone wonderful eventually, Nick. Penguins always find their mate for life, and you'd be no exception. She giggled through strained coughs, turning her head slightly as if she could see Natalie. I don't know you, but I bet you're the most beautiful woman in the world if my crown prince chose you. Well, after me, of course. Another laugh, this time accompanied by tears from the two of us. There's just one more to go, so look after each other. Love well and experience everything you can. And don't forget, Natalie gripped my hand with her left, a hand on her bump with the right as we closed our eyes. I could hear the scratching sound more prominently now, but I kept my eyes shut, not wanting to ruin the moment. I'll always be with you. We were so excited to have a baby. Natalie had come from a big family and was eager to start expanding her own. Even though I was reluctant, I couldn't help but share in her enthusiasm when so many late nights were spent fawning over baby names, cute outfits, and lofty plans for the future on how our kid would even behave around us, determined to be cool parents. But in between all of that, my mind would cast back to those tapes of my mom, the only parent I really knew. I wanted to use them as a guidebook for my own steps. She'd been such an integral part of life, it seemed
Oh my god.
odd to not have her in
He's
it now.
on the balcony.
Keeping the last tape separate, I rewatched the entire set one by one, reliving those moments I couldn't truly appreciate until my own burgeoning journey into parenthood. But when I got to the broken bone tape, I froze. Once again, she leaned into the camera and whispered, eyes full of fright and panic, "Don't look." I pushed pause on the video and took a moment. Surely I was just highly medicated at the time. There couldn't really be anything there, right? So why was I so reluctant to move my eyes to the right to find out? Taking a breath, I moved the video frame by frame and watched the corner where her face didn't cover. That shadow, that same fucking shadow looming in the background, eyes burning red with fury. Don't look, don't look, don't look, don't look. I jumped. The video was skipping, stuck on the sounds of my mother's panic-stricken voice begging me not to stare, but I couldn't help it. I stared and watched this creature take confident, unnatural, and twitchy strides from the background, getting ever closer to the camera. I saw the muscles on its face twist and udulate as it pressed its cheeks up into a twisted grin. The sight of rotten earth and unspeakable things in its mouth all displaying themselves in full glory as it intoned one word that sent screams through my home before soon. Natalie was 8 months gone, petite and a history of prior drug abuse. They said her heart just couldn't take it. Her body gave out, and that it was a miracle our daughter survived. I took it all in, and yet none of it as I cradled my entire universe in my arms. The second greatest woman I'd ever known now taken from me too. Phoebe Griff. Unable to take my eyes off her perfect little face as she slept soundly, just 12 feet from her dead mother. Her name is Phoebe, and she is the crown princess. Somewhere in the corner of my eye, a shadow cast itself over Natalie's bed, right as they put the sheets over her. From that night on, there would always be noises outside our home, always faint howling, always a solitary spot in the front of the property where no light could touch it. For a while, forgot about the videos. Forgot about everything that wasn't Phoebe. Raising her became priority number one, and I worked any extra hours I needed to. Give up any friendship I had to, and spite myself in whatever way was necessary to ensure that my perfect girl slept soundly at night. It wasn't until Phoebe's second birthday last week that I finally got the courage to dig out the videos and release the last one. How many times had I sat at home, emotionally destroyed and at a crossroads in my life, waiting to see this woman's face and hope she'd somehow have the magic words to guide me. As the picture flickered on, the logo shining up on screen, I cast my head back with a mixture of surprise and sadness as I realized this is the end of the year. I was older than her now. Hi, sweetie. I guess we finally reached the end, huh? Her voice sounded younger. I looked down and saw her standing up. No chair or wallpaper in sight. It looked like she was recording this in her bedroom, a picture of health, all things considered. Her eyes red from crying, but her voice unwavering, like she prepared these words carefully. This is technically the final video for you, but the first for me. Weird how this all works, but this is how it needs to happen. If you're watching this, you've got your own little princess to protect. The crown prince has now become the king, and I couldn't be prouder. She beamed, but my stomach tightened at those words. Your own little princess. I breathed, my chest tightening. How did you know? I imagine you're now wondering how I know. Well, that's not the important part. What's important is if you saw what you think you saw within the videos, between the frames. There's something lurking here, Nick. Something ancient. I felt the house shudder, settling into place, no doubt. But I couldn't separate myself from the fear running through my body. It feeds on misfortune. It watches from the shadows and waits for small, tiny windows to make itself known. I don't know where it came from or what it is, but I know what it wants. A rumbling behind me, the sound of wood splintering and creaking, the unmistakable sound of taping that I'd heard every time we did the mantra at the end of the video. I was shaking, but I didn't want to stop watching. It wants us, Nick. We seem to be a source for it. When it finishes using us, it moves on. A long time ago, I was told that if I captured it in film, solidified it in these repeatable tapes, it would stay long, maybe we can stop it. I have no idea if it'll work, but you deserve to know now.
Last
You can
day.
almost certainly see it too, because
B, sorry.
if it doesn't stop here, if you start to see it, start to experience misfortune. My heart skipped, tripping over the stairs and narrowly missing cracking my skull as a child, losing my first tooth, the hit and run that shattered my arm, my first broken bone, marrying and losing Natalie, my first love. Oh no. Oh God, no. I willed my body to move, to leap out of the seat and rush to Phoebe's room, but I had to hear the rest through, screaming at my mom to tell me the solution. When your dad and Molly told me about our curse, how he took me in after my father died, about how it passes from father to daughter, mother to son, and so forth, you can try to avoid it, but it always finds a way. She looked down in shame, clutching at her sleeves. Truth be told, I didn't want to get pregnant. But things have a way of happening, and I knew I couldn't give you up. She glanced behind her. Something off camera staring, grabbing at her arms and rubbing them. Shame and fear on her face. I'm so sorry, baby, but I want you to know that there is a power in these words, in these videos. I will do everything I can to protect you, just like I know you'll protect your child, no matter who it hurts in the process, because one last time, I just had to close my eyes one last time and it would all be over. I did it on instinct. It didn't matter that there were a slew of sounds alerting me to an invading presence in my home, that it was rapidly approaching me. All that mattered was the mantra. I'll be here for you always. But what I heard parroting me back was not my mother. A guttural, inhuman voice barked back the phrase, and I swear I felt its breath inches from my face.
Man.
I felt eyes, unrestricted by pupils or sockets, spin around, focusing on my weakest point, but I didn't waver. After a few agonizing moments, it darted away and out of view, leaving only the static of the TV to keep me aware that I wasn't in danger. As soon as I knew it was safe, I ran to Phoebe's room and checked on her, convinced that she was next in a long line of losses. Convinced that some other specter had taken her from me. Convinced I would be alone again. You can imagine my relief when I opened the door to find her softly sleeping, clutching her teddy bear with her own attached blankie, the same toy my mom had given me. I looked at her with the enormity of the situation overshadowing me. The realization she was the same age I was when my mom got diagnosed. The realization that soon, I would be the one making a slew of videos for milestones I'd never get to see her inherit. My crown princess's kingdom of nightmares. I don't know if this is what my mother intended, but I took those words at the end to heart. Protect your child, no matter who it hurts in the process. I'm sorry. I don't know how this translates across mediums, but there's a power in describing an old and malevolent force. Just like there is seen in the corner of your eye or when you experience a lucky break from death. A misstep here and a wrong turn there. You'll always see it. My mother gave up everything to buy time. Give me the chance to right the wrongs and find a better way, a way that involves my daughter growing up with her father in her life, without the plague of whatever this is hanging over either of us. Maybe you won't be the one. Maybe it'll simply look at you, find you, not to its liking, as it did to me that fateful night. Inches away from my flesh and determining that I wasn't ripe enough yet. But someone will come across this, and it will bite. It will bite and never let go. Be it nightmares, sleep paralysis, a slew of unfortunate mishaps, or something flitting in the corner of your eye, it'll be there. whatever it is, waiting. I wish you well, and I hope you don't judge me too harshly.
Second mid.
But to me and to Phoebe, family is everything. So close your eyes and tell me. If you use sleep sounds, stop. I was diagnosed with insomnia several years ago. I'd lie down in bed and my heart would race. My imagination would run wild, causing me to think of every terrible scenario that could happen, and I would sweat so much that sometimes I would have to take a shower in the middle of the night. My doctor explained it to me in a way that compared it to someone with arachnophobia, a fear of spiders. The same way they see a spider and panic uncontrollably. The same thing that happened to me when I would try and go to sleep. I tried everything from nighttime yoga, deep breathing exercises, a new bed, medication, and even started to get a little dependent on narcotics. I used anything at my disposal to counter my irrational fear of going to sleep. Now, let me be clear. I was never a drug user. Never smoked or drank or popped pills to get high. When I started using drugs to help me sleep, I knew that something serious needed to be done before it spiraled into something worse. I talked to a lot of online forums where people like me could connect and try to see that we are not alone. It helps. Having people to talk to insomnia isn't watching TV at night instead of sleeping. It's not staying up late on your phone and being restless. Insomnia is a condition. As I scanned the Sleepless forum, looking for some internet friend I had made, I stumbled across a post with an interesting title. It read, "I found the cure for insomnia." And usually when I saw something like this, it was some sort of sponsored ad, or some bot trying to sell us pills or something. But seeing as though the alternative was to get into bed and have a panic attack, I clicked on the thread and began to read. The original poster, or OP, had this to say: "I found the cure for insomnia. I've slept perfectly every night since I downloaded the app. It's called Sounds Like Sleep, created by a company called Dream Systems." The OP went on to describe their experience with the app and how quickly it worked. I scanned down to see several regulars commenting and saying they downloaded the app and couldn't wait to try it. Others only had positive things to say about using the app already. So I downloaded the app as well. I keep a Bluetooth speaker in my bedroom, usually just to play some soft music while I cleaned or as a distraction from the insomnia. I made sure not to check the clock, as I found out early on that doing so would make me panic more about how badly I needed to fall asleep, which would only keep me awake longer. Insomnia is a cruel condition. I opened the app, which greeted me with a soft animation to a robot getting into bed. The app had several options: rainy nights, the beach of dreams, white noise, and soothing sounds. I had always had a fondness for storms, so I tried rainy nights. The volume was perfect, not too loud to draw my attention, but just loud enough to block out any other sounds. I sat on the edge of my bed and reached for my nightly anti-anxiety medication. The sounds of the wind and rain washed over me, and surprisingly, I was already feeling tired. Without taking the medication, I laid back and rested my head on the pillow. As always, my heartbeat picked up, I felt my face get hot, and I braced myself for the coming dread. I took a deep breath, held it in for a count of 5, then exhaled. A low thunder crawled across the room, and my speaker, leaves rustled, and the rain picked up just slightly. I felt my heart return to normal and my face hot. Not daring to disturb the effects, I closed my eyes without even getting under my blankets and fell instantly asleep. I woke up more refreshed than I had felt in years. I nearly sprang out of bed. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 7 on the dot. I had no idea when I had finally gone to sleep. It was late, and yet I felt amazing. I went on about my day like it was any other, only I was happy. I was energized, and to my surprise, the general anxiety that would often plague me didn't show its ugly face even once. Truthfully, I was looking forward to bedtime, just to try the app again. That night, I took the time to get under the covers. I set the app, and this time chose the Beach of Dreams. As the waves began to crash gently, I closed my eyes, still expecting the wave of panic to begin. When it didn't, I sighed relief and almost felt tears begin to form. I've been a slave to insomnia for years, and now, with just the sleep sounds from this app, I truly felt cured. Before I knew it, I was asleep. The next morning, I woke up even more refreshed. I checked my phone. It was again 7 on the dot. I went through my daily routine with such a pep in my step that people even commented on how happy I was. When it was time for bed, I again set the app, this time to white noise, and got into bed fiercely. I was asleep in seconds. When I woke this time, I felt exhausted.
Wow, that's
Like I'd
smoke.
run a marathon all night. I groggily sat up without looking. I knew it was 7 in the morning. I went about my day not quite as peppy as I had the previous days, but it was still better than before when I couldn't sleep at all. I felt odd all day. I knew I had slept, but I felt like I had dreamed I was awake or something. When I got into bed that night, I selected soothing sounds from the app and closed my eyes. Again, I fell asleep in no time. I awoke in such a panic that I thought I was having a midnight panic attack, something that was common for people with anxiety and insomnia. My eyes searched the room. I don't know how, but I felt like something was in the room with me. Left to right I looked. My room was empty. I looked again. There it was, crouched at the foot of my bed, with both hands on the blankets, as if it had just climbed out from underneath my bed. I saw it. Its hairs hung over its face, but when it saw me, it froze. We were both frozen. I wanted to kick and scream. I tried to, but my body was locked. Stiff as a board, I could not even begin to close my hand into a fist. I screamed internally at this thing at the foot of my bed. The only thing in my entire body that could move was my eyes. The thing cocked its head to the side. It didn't make a sound, but I knew that somehow it realized it couldn't move. I couldn't fight it. I had heard of sleep paralysis before. It's a state where your body is still asleep even after you wake up. It usually lasts for a moment or two before your brain tries to comprehend that you are both asleep and awake. I remembered reading that victims would sometimes hallucinate that evil things were in their rooms because when we're paralyzed like this, we begin to panic and manifest images of evil things that wanted to hurt us. This was a hallucination. My heart was thundering in my chest. I focused all of my energy into just moving a finger. I thought that if I could move one finger, then the rest of my body would follow. It was no use. I was trapped in my bed. The thing knew this. It pressed down on the bed with both hands and dragged my body higher up the bed, its long hair still covering its face. I felt the pressure on the bed as it pushed down with both hands. It was almost over me now. I screamed, and not a sound escaped my closed mouth. I could feel its hair on my face. I slammed my eyes closed, and the sounds of the app filled my ears. I fell asleep instantly. When I woke up, it was with a gasp. I shot upright in my bed and looked around the room. Nothing. Empty. Just the light from the sun pouring out of the window. I exhaled a deep sigh
Oh my
of
God.
relief and went about my day. That night, I turned the app on. I chose soothing sounds again, no particular reason. I turned it on and got into bed. Like each night before, I was asleep in a matter of seconds, but my sleep didn't last long. Again, I woke up in a panic. My eyes shot open
Hey,
and
boss.
I searched the room for more. Again, I felt my body locked to the bed. Sleep paralysis had me again. If I could, I'm sure my lip would have trembled in fear as I slowly looked down to the foot of my bed. It wasn't there. The long-haired thing that had crawled out from my bed last night wasn't there. I exhaled through my nose and looked up at the ceiling. It was above me, holding onto the ceiling like a lizard. Its long hair was hanging inches above my face. I felt the muscles in my body tighten. I never wanted to scream more than I did that night. With this thing over me, I could only inhale and exhale, unable to lift even a finger. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I didn't want it to alert that I was awake. The sounds of my breathing slowed, and I heard it. Not from the creature clinging to the ceiling, but from the Bluetooth speaker that projected the soothing sounds of the app. Come out, sweet mother, and feast while it slumbers. The voice was so faint, I had to be imagining it as well. Come out and feed. As if the creature had waited for this command, it began to move. No. It faced the ceiling, but now above me. I watched as it was tilting its head back to look down at me. It kept tilting, extending further than humanly possible. The hair swayed as this thing whose body clung to the ceiling and back was to me. It now faced me. White eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It had tilted so far back that it was looking directly at me. If I could have, I'd have screamed until my lungs gave out. I couldn't. My eyes rolled back and I did the only thing I could do. I fell back asleep, lulled there by the soothing sounds. I woke up at 7 this morning. I again felt weak, like I had worked out for the entirety of the night. Every one of my muscles were sore. I slowly got out of bed and went about my day. My day was uneventful. I felt tired for most of it. I didn't turn the app on when I got to bed. I was hesitant, but I had to know. I stepped out of bed about 30 minutes ago and turned the app on. I listened for a while. I had started to feel sleepy, but since I was standing up and out of bed, I was able to fight the sleep. 20 minutes in, I heard a voice, faintly over the sounds of the rainstorm. Come out, O sweet mother, and feast while it slumbers. And alright guys,
Let's say you have 50k in cash and you use that to buy a $500,000 property to live in.
Punished for entering the spirit world. A Dachira trip report by Agent 11421, posted to earwig.org July 19th, 2005. I had heard a lot of reports about Dachira stramonium, and I was anxious to try it. Knowing the dangerous effects of the plant, I decided to start out with some small doses. I first tried chewing 4 seeds, but after an hour, they seemed to have no effect. I then chewed another 4 seeds, but again, the same results, none. I decided to get braver, and the next night, I chewed 20 whole seeds. But after an hour, I felt nothing again. Now I was getting frustrated. I decided to try 40 whole seeds, but once again, I was disappointed with no effects. It was at this point, I just totally gave up on the seeds. I then tried smoking the leaves, and I smoked 4 Dachira cigarettes one after the other, which again, had no effect whatsoever. I live alone and was unbothered by anybody. Being mindful of the dangers of Dachira, I took no unnecessary chances. I waited until late evening, about 7 PM, to try the dried leaves. I took a handful of them and boiled them in 3 cups of water for 30 minutes. The concoction I had made was very dark in colour, and I strained the liquid in my strainer into a coffee mug. It smelled and tasted awful, so I decided to sweeten it with 2 tablespoons of honey and drank it down as quickly as possible. I was immensely surprised at how quickly the effects came on. Within 10 to 15 minutes, I began to get a feeling of being drunk. I knew that my best bet was to head straight for bed, where I felt I would be safest. My usual nightly custom was to bring a glass of water into my bedroom with me. But this night I was drunk by the Dachira. I lost my balance and fell against the wall, down to the floor and breaking the glass in the process. I returned to the kitchen sink and filled another glass of water, but again my legs gave way under me and I fell down like a drunkard. Once again, I filled a glass with water, but it somehow slipped out of my hands and crashed to the floor. By the time I finally made it to my bathroom, I'd broken 5 glasses, but I wasn't aware of it until the next morning when I saw the damage. Finally resting in my bed, I fell asleep quickly. I had an extremely vivid and realistic dream of this invisible being grabbing me, throwing me headfirst into a wall. Try as I might, I was unable to see it at all. Once again, he picked me up and slammed me headfirst into the wall. Then it began to beat me. It grabbed my forearm and snapped it in two. My bones were protruding from my flesh, and my blood was squirting high up into the air. I pleaded with the being to leave me alone, but it showed me no mercy whatsoever. It picked me up again and slammed me headfirst into the wall. And it was at that point I woke up and realised I was dreaming. But I was nonetheless quite shaken by the whole ordeal. I had the strangest feeling that the being was punishing me for entering the spirit world and wanted to teach me a lesson of some sort. I tried to sit up in bed, but I felt a very strong gravitational pull as I did do so. It was sort of like the force of gravity was making it difficult for me to sit up. This did not scare me, and I thought little of it. I looked around the room, and everything seemed to be normal. When suddenly, this powerful surge overcame me. I instantly made a sigh ball with my hands and tossed it at the wall. This ended up tearing a large hole in the wall, which worried me senseless, because I feared that my landlord would find out and evict me. It was right now that I laid down and went back to sleep. What I didn't realise at the time was that I was never awake at any time at all. All of this was a very vivid and clear dream. The next morning, I arose and went into my kitchen to prepare my morning coffee. As I sat at the kitchen table, a sight frightened me. It was my beloved house cat. She was laying on the floor still and lifeless, and her body was bloated. As I watched her lifeless body, my heart was deeply saddened. I could only conclude in that moment that she must have drunk some of the Datura brew from the pot on the stove and died from it. Sadly, I sat at the kitchen table for an hour when I noticed that my cat was changing shape. I approached closer and found out that it wasn't even my black cat at all. It was my black leather jacket. I'm happy to say that my cat was fine and in good health. I had no further effects from the Datura after that, but I found it to be an unpleasant experience, which seemed to have an evil connotation to it. I flushed the remaining Datura down the toilet and haven't tried it again since. I was deeply grateful that I was alone during this, because I believe if I had a sitter, he or she may have panicked when I fell so many times and have me rushed to the hospital, and that would have wrecked my career entirely.
Double points.
One thing is certain after all this: everybody's metabolism is different. I'm convinced that the dosage I took would have most probably been lethal to somebody else. My advice: stay well away from this plant. Edibles gave me a nightmare. A story sent in by a subscriber.
Stuck here.
This takes place in what I believe to be the late summer of 2019. I can't say for certain though, because this was the time of my life where I was sleeping most of the day, and smoking stupid quantities of pot. Basically anything I could do to cope with my clinical depression, suicidal thoughts, and PTSD. As you might guess, waterboarding my brain in THC and being starved of dopamine and serotonin for so long results in some vague and blurry memories, but I do my best here to include as much detail as possible. With that disclaimer and context taken care of, let's jump into the story at hand. The entire situation begins when my dad and stepmom decided to leave town for a trip. I honestly can't remember what the purpose of the trip was. I guess it was to visit family or just go on vacation, but the only thing I was concerned with was the opportunity to blast my brain and avoid all semblance of real-world responsibility. This was before weed was legalised in the state, so I made arrangements with my dealer to acquire as much bud as I could afford. My plan was to go full ZZ Zaza one day. I remember this being the only time in my life that I seriously considered stealing money. Also, I could afford more marijuana. I'm relieved when looking back on this situation. I never stole from a family, even though I had the opportunity to many times. Anyways, I cleared my wallet on several grams of my dealer's top shelf gelato that he got in from Colorado.
Tear them to pieces.
Perfect. Keep wasting those little shits on sight.
Hiding from zombies until dawn. A Diamond Hydrometric report posted by TC Demo to earwid.org, December 26, 2001. The following is a brief recollection of possibly the most frightening experience of my life. I experienced a kind of irrational fear that I did when I was 4 or 5 years old. I remembered that I had swallowed 21 Diamond Hydronate pills, and that none of what I saw could possibly be real or harmless, but it honestly made no difference to the fear and anxiety I felt. Upon the realization that there was no way I could stop any of what was taking place before me, I slipped deeper into a state of shock and horror. I spent most of the trip with my back against the wall, convulsing in fear. It all started out quite innocently. I downed 21 pills with 1 gulp of milk and waited for the effects to come on. I felt the typical heaviness and relaxation flow over the nerves, and then I realised something was quite wrong. Everything I was seeing was some kind of spider. Little clear spiders were scurrying over everything I looked at. In the darker areas, my desk, bed, etc., there were huge, more detailed spiders that were coming right for me. But luckily, they dissolved when they came into the light. Then they started crawling on me and biting me. I could even see and feel their bites. It made no sense to me. I'd never experienced anything like this on a drug before, and my sense of confidence and control simply vanished. I grabbed them and squished them. My hands felt slimy, but there was nothing there. It was like they were actually half real, somehow bridging the gap from my mind to reality. Although anyone can easily see that they were nothing more than convincing hallucinations, I wasn't convinced, and that was enough to water the seeds of uncertainty and fear within myself. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and there was a body slumped just outside the window. It didn't move or shake or wiggle like the spiders did. It didn't just appear there. It was there at my first glance out the window, and remained motionless and unchanging the entire time. I was totally immersed. My skin felt as though I was deep underwater with a constant pressure everywhere. I couldn't go back to my room because of my fear of the biting spiders, so I went to my living room and sat down at the computer. I kept hearing sickening voices calling my name from behind me. And when I turned around, there was a giant purple, white-spotted mushroom sitting positioned on my couch, quivering and shaking. It wouldn't go away. I looked away and looked back, and it was still there. I knew it couldn't be real, but it didn't seem to act the way hallucinations usually do. Then, it suddenly absorbed itself into one of the cushions, and it took on the same purple-white spotted appearance and began shaking. I could only gasp. Soon everything was shaking and wobbling. The love seat right beside me started wobbling and morphing into ridiculous shapes. A lamp in the corner bent down, did a full circle bending around and spun back. I had no explanation for why I thought this was so horrifying, except that I had no ground patch to stand on. No words of wisdom to fall back on came to my mind. I was completely alone, and everything seemed to actually be me, manifesting out of my hallucinations somehow. Everything I saw felt wrong and evil, and somehow intent on harming me. A rocking chair in the corner began rocking violently, and a face formed on it. It was laughing at me. And then, they were all laughing. As they laughed, they would point to me and look at each other. The face came right up to me from out of the rocking chair and passed through me as it laughed. I was utterly horrified and sweating profusely. Then I caught a glance of the large window and saw people reflected who weren't in the room. It seemed as if they were in a different room altogether. A room that was an exact mirror of the one I was in. They saw me see them, and then they came, zombie-eyed to the window, finding the glass with their hands. They were all pale white and sickly looking, a typical undead stereotype. They were passing through the glass onto my couch. My only saviour through this terror seemed to be light. I was too afraid to go over to the other side of the room and turn on the other lights, or leave the room and wander through the darkness of the house for that matter. So there I was, squatted and nauseated with fear, when the zombie things came towards me. But as they came into the light, they became transparent and dissolved into nothingness. I was there until the next day. I was still very much intoxicated as dawn broke, but the symbolism of it, and my extreme tiredness, somehow gave me the courage to go back to my room and sleep. If there's a lesson I learned, it would be to respect fear for what it
Hit the
is.
exit button. We're ready.
I tried everything I could to make the experience positive, or at least neutral. When all else failed, I had to wait for sunrise, and believe it would somehow release me from my fear, which fortunately for me, it did.
Looks like s'mores.
3,750, 4,500 LSD nightmare trip report. First things first, as you can see by the title, this trip ended up being one of the most powerful I've ever been through, and I was in no condition to be taking acid at all, let alone such a massive amount. I was an idiot. Learned from my mistakes. It was a little less than a year ago. A good friend of mine had been tripping 1 to 2 times a month for about 6 months, and had been slowly increasing the doses we'd been taking. So by this time I had taken 1,000 UG a few times, and was extremely comfortable with the dose. I wanted a little more excitement for this particular night, so I got in touch with my source and arranged to pick up a higher dose. I met him around 5:30 in the afternoon after work, right at the beginning of a long weekend. He told me that he had a new batch of LSD that had just come in, and that it was super strong. So I went with that instead of the other acid I'd been buying. What I didn't realise at the time was that this sheet of acid was between 250 to 300 UG per tab. So by failing to ask into this new batch further, I sealed my own fate. I took 15 tabs of this blotter all at once, around 6 o'clock with my buddy. We took 4 tabs to be safe, and we decided to watch YouTube videos until we came up. What follows is a little foggy. All in all, I only remember a small portion of this trip. 6:30 PM.
Headed to refuel.
This is when the effects started to become very clear. My heart started pumping more, and I could feel the stuff climbing up my spine. At this stage, I also started getting afraid I would have a bad trip. I don't know why. The vibrations were pretty bad at this point already as well. 7 PM. The first peak hits me. I was not ready for it to take hold so quickly. In the past, it had sometimes taken 90 minutes until I even started to notice the drug. I made it through this one okay by allowing YouTube to distract me. 9 PM. The next wave hits me and just blows me the fuck away. I remember looking at the TV and seeing a flower bloom out from the screen towards my face. As it neared me, I noticed that there was a woman standing in front of it. Flabbergasted and completely unable to communicate, I stared at her face wide-eyed for a few seconds. She looked deep into my eyes and raised a finger to her lips, telling me to shh, before exploding into a kaleidoscope of colours that blanket the room. As I snap out of that, I'm extremely confused and afraid. I yell out, "What the fuck was that?" And my friend started to freak out. I believe because we were seeing the same thing. He doesn't remember this portion of the trip at all. 9:40 PM. Since that last experience, we were both getting more and more worked up, feeding off of each other's wild energy, until it literally became a screaming match. Both of us were now 100% convinced that the world was coming to an end right outside, and that it was our fault for some reason. I make the biggest mistake of the whole night at this time. I break all the rules of tripping again. I walk outside by myself in my boxers, while I'm somewhere between 3,750 and 4,500 microliters every day. At this point I am peaking extremely hard. I can't really see anything. On a dose as high as this, it's kind of like you lose your original 5 senses, and instead of the 6th sense that can perceive everything all at once. It's like every bit of sensory input comes at you on a single plane, if that makes sense. So it's 9:45 PM now. Somehow I've made it across a busy street without getting hit by a car, and I've also managed to lose my boxers. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I'm now completely naked in public, and I don't know who I am, where I'm from, etc. And on top of all that, I can't see anything past the hallucinations at this point. So across this busy street I see a group of what may or may not be people, and since I'm completely petrified I go over to them to try and ask for some kind of help. As I get closer I start to hear yelling coming from the group, and a large guy comes running up to me. I thought he was going to kill me, so I try to run, but I end up stumbling into this dude's car and he socks me right in the side of the face. I decide that communicating isn't going to work with these people, so I stumble away, back in the direction of my apartment. 9:55 PM. As I'm trying to get away from the dude who hit me, I hear someone yelling for me to fucking stop. It's obviously terrified, so I run for my life in the opposite direction, only to be stopped by 3 people with guns drawn and pointed at me. I didn't realise that these people were police at the time, but they sure as hell were. They tried to shout some commands at me, but I can't understand anything they're trying to tell me. I tried to walk away and get hit with a taser. I watched the prongs float through the air at what seems to be about 100 of light novel speed. As soon as it hits my skin, I'm completely ripped from my body and I enter a completely infinite and black space. I'm floating through this space and I see a very small point of light, like the sign of a distant star in one direction. I decide to float in the direction of this light. As I draw nearer, I can make out colours coming from the light that I've never seen before. Not just shades of colours that I knew, but entirely new kinds of colours. I continue moving closer to the light, and become aware of a very beautiful piece of music playing. It's a song I have never heard before in my life, but it feels so familiar to me, it completely relaxes me. As I realise this, I also begin to feel that I have been to this place before. The limitless void and nothingness with this distant light felt more comfortable than my own bed. I bask for what feels like hours in the presence of the most comforting feeling I have ever experienced. Meanwhile, as the light draws near, I realise that it's not a star, but it's actually a book. I approach this massive book, which seems to be the only thing around me, and flip through it. I don't actually reach out and touch it, but somehow using my mind I am able to turn the enormous and ancient feeling pages of this book. It appears to be alive. It looks like a massive tree began to grow out of the nothingness around here, and instead of leaves this book grew from its branches. The pages lay open in front of me.
Gonna be ashamed to get it dirty.
On the left page there is a blue energy emitting from within the book itself. The energy manifests as blue veins twisting and splitting, all pointing towards the spine of the book. On the opposite page there is a similar energy with red instead of blue. The words "Do
Duality, truth. You shouldn't be seeing this right now, floated through my mind. As I heard the last word, I snapped out of it. It felt like it literally existed as part of that black space for years. But as I came to, I was still in the middle of falling from being tased. So I hit the ground. I still have no fucking idea who I am or anything, but the police end up having to tase me 2 more times just to get me to stay on the ground. They then load me into an ambulance and I black out from there until I get to jail. This experience was by far the single most intense of my entire life. I just felt like sharing it here. I've come to accept it, and I actually took a lot of good things away from that trip, so I don't regret it. But I would not advise you to take that much LSD in a bad mood, or you will not be the same for a while, or even taking it in general. I hope that someone can learn from this experience and maybe keep from making the same mistakes. TLDR, took between 3,750 UG and 4,500 UG of acid and lost my shit. Don't be an idiot. I see the most vivid hallucinations. A benzidamine and caffeine triple at Nico PO1 from Irawid. Published on the 11th of November 2020. 0 hours in. A dose of 1,000 milligrams. 2 capsules chased with a Red Bull. 10 minutes. No bad taste or numbness in mouth or throat. Gel capsules working as intended. 49 minutes. No effect so far. 50 minutes. I feel a slight warning that something is coming, but it seems like it's probably mostly just paranoia. 55 minutes. Feeling of an aura. Eyes seem to waver, and I have a heady feel like sativa. 1 hour and 5 minutes. Eyes suddenly dry. Any feeling is intensified and the body is feeling slightly heavy. As I stood up, I instinctually went to unplug the wire to my headphones. Except for using the wired ones. It's a hallucination. 10 minutes. Difficult concentrating. 1 hour and 35 minutes. Objects seem to be wavering, wiggling or moving in my peripheral vision. I hear what sounds like music from the kitchen. My roommate must be back home, but when I go check, they're not there. No lights are on anywhere except my room. Starting to notice the classic emotional effects. Feelings of impending doom, anxiety, jumpy, fear, terror. Darkness intensifies all of the effects of deliriance, making water trips a significant emotional challenge. 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Need to shut down that pickup
Emotional
office for
effects
now.
intensify. Constant feeling of someone or something behind my back. Auditory hallucination of breathing behind me.
Bonus points.
1 hour and 45 minutes. I look at the edge of my brown desk, behind which is a white wall. I see in my direct vision, i.e. looking directly at the hallucination, what looks like air turbulence if one could see such a thing. Tiny translucent ripples, whirlwinds and currents of air. They appear close to the edge of my desk and disintegrate after several seconds with a cloud of transparent ghost-like ash. After a few minutes I see small translucent spiders going back and forth across the edge. If I look at one individual spider for long enough, it will disintegrate into the ash cloud. 1 hour 55 minutes. Massively difficult to concentrate or use words. Hands shaking slightly. Very, very heavy feeling. 2 hours. More transparent spiders on the edge of the desk. Like a busy street. Some of them are bigger now. When I look at a single spider, it starts to do weird things. Like attack other spiders or shapeshift into a tiny deer or house. Then disintegrating once again into an ash cloud. stick my hand onto the edge of the desk and the spiders move over the top of my hand. 2 hours and 5 minutes. Starting to see the first signs of the classic trails, streamers and streaks. If this is the main effect of a person taking Benzie wants to see, they really shouldn't be taking Benzie. 2 hours and 10 minutes. Feeling sudden chills and also fearful of things behind my back. I put on my jacket. In my peripheral vision, I start to see faces, heads and hands and inanimate objects and textures. Some of these objects seems to be moving like spirits. A pile of faux fur in the corner of my room suddenly feels more threatening than anything else I've seen so far, and I don't know why. It appears as though feeling terror is not a choice during this trip, it's something I must cope with instead. 2 hours and 20 minutes. The hallucinated music from the kitchen now sounds like a podcast. My headphones are around my neck, playing music, but when I put them on my ears, nothing is actually playing. I feel physically exhausted by this point. No stimulant effects so far at all. The spiders on the edge of the desk are now crawling away from the edge towards the keyboard, but fade out before getting more than a couple inches.
Anywhere else is a miss.
2 hours and 30 minutes. The spiders are now crawling over the top of the mouse when I'm not directly looking at it. In the room I now see black spiders in every dark corner, nook, etc. wherever there is a shadow. I start to seem more real. 2 hours and 45 minutes. I've been feeling random itches, tingles and pinpricks for a while, but now I'm certain that I'm feeling tactile hallucinations. 3 hours. A dark spirit appears in the corner of my room. I see what looks like a fuzzy black leg of a very large spider curl around the corner of my shelf. Then another, and now 4. Then 4 more on the wall opposite. They're actually long, jagged fingers. I'm looking directly at the small spectre as their head slides into view. Their eyes are like 2 bright spots in the shadow-like circle that is their head. Then it opens its toothed mouth in a silent roar and rushes towards the centre of the room, but disappearing far before it reaches me. It appears that bright light keeps away the darker hallucinations, but enables the more bright, transparent hallucinations to exist. 3 hours and 5 minutes. I feel what seems like tiny spider webs crawling across my bare hands and socked feet, but nothing is visible. 3 hours and 35 minutes, I'm starting to sober up. All effects are fading. 3 hours and 50 minutes. Feeling 90% sober as well as feeling more energetic. 4 hours. I take a dose of 700 milligrams. 1 capsule of chicks with the Red Bull. At 4 hours and 10 minutes at this point I am unable to distinguish between paranoid thoughts and actual hallucinations in my peripheral vision. 4 hours and 20 minutes. I'm extremely dehydrated. The room seems darker than usual and I'm feeling very warm suddenly. 4 hours and 25 minutes. Head and body heaviness are slowly returning. 4 hours and 40 minutes. The hallucination of the headphone wires in my wireless headphones twitches in my peripheral vision. 4 hours and 45 minutes. This last capsule had a small tear. Resulting in a small amount of Benzie spilled out while swallowing. I know what people mean about the awful taste. Also the back of my mouth and throat feel numb. 5 hours and 10 minutes. More auditory hallucinations. I'm now hearing conversations in the kitchen and whispering voices from the opposite corner of my room. The whispers seem to move like an invisible auditory cloud throughout the kitchen. I feel as if the voice cloud brushes my legs back. turned the volume up on my headphones by a lot to hear it. Will regret that later. 5 hours and 15 minutes. Feeling significant time dilation, as well as painful pinpricks all over. I can't tell if I'm just extremely dehydrated or if my numb throat is just making it difficult to swallow. Probably both. I feel dizzy, and I notice much more vibrant trails. 7 hours and 30 minutes.
Sentry turrets up.
Much the same effects as the first dose up until now. I went to use the washroom and heard a swarm of bees buzzing inside the ceiling fan.
Dark nap for you.
8 hours. I'm getting physically exhausted by this point, almost blacked out. I'm not sure if the cause is lack of sleep. I started to trip at bedtime. Maybe it's post-adrenaline fatigue or high dosage.
This trial should be reward enough.
8 hours.
There will be prizes.
Reach the peak. I see the most vivid hallucinations. Animals, spirits, lots and lots of spiders everywhere. In every dark spot of the room, every shadow cast by my blanket, my clothes on the floor, inside pockets of my clothes, everywhere. When I look at a single spider, it shapeshifts into a small rodent, then a cockroach, then a snake, then a lizard, and some other strange creature, without end. The spiders are now on my body. There are only 2 to 3 in total. Feet, legs, chest, arms, back, neck, ears, head, everywhere. I feel tingles, pinpricks, and the occasional jabbing pain all over my body. All hallucinating. I look into the darkest corner of the room and see a very large spider with an army of tiny spiders on her back, likely hundreds. They peek out from the corner and walk towards me, and a feeling as though it's coming directly for me occurs. However, it turns back around after walking a couple feet and disappears into the shadow. 8 hours and 35 minutes. Come down is taking much longer. I'm still having episodes of vibrant hallucination and emotional effects. They come and then subside like waves. 8 hours and 45 minutes. I've been listening to music from the start up until now. I had to turn it off. Listening to music makes me feel more exhausted. Getting physically quiet to hear and understand the music. 9 hours and 15 minutes. The lights brighten suddenly, a couple times, which is either hallucination or pupil dilation. Other hallucination effects are still going on though, although they are less vivid. I heard a sudden turn of the music, or podcast in the kitchen. 10 hours and 15 minutes. I went to get more water. Saw a shockingly vivid hallucination in my peripheral vision of an adult person who looked like a cross between the Ring Girl and the Heath Ledger Joker. They were following me and peeking around the corners. They would disappear when I looked right at the corner, then poke their head, feet and body out a few seconds after looking away. Had to keep them behind me to not see them. 10 hours and 30 minutes. I'm no longer feeling any physical hallucination. I feel very strong malaise, like flu, and also have a migraine, including a sensitivity to noise and bright light. I'm literally ready to fall asleep at any second, but I hear and feel bugs crawling into my ear when I try to close my eyes for too long.
Got a wall weapon here.
11 hours. Hallucinations are subsiding. I'm able to change clothes and close my eyes without too much issue. 15 hours in. I kept jumping away every 10 minutes.
I bet they would say never came back to
Something
life.
touched me, or a loud noise. All hallucinations. I have only felt this fatigued a few times in my life. In the end, I am only able to get 1 hour's sleep and then 2 consecutive hours sleep after waking up every 10 minutes for a while. The lingering tingling of spiders, especially on my bare feet, as well as lingering emotional effects. different now than any other time. They appear as outlines of any bright light source after moving my eyes, like a ghost image or outline. My eyes feel really sore and swollen. The shape-shifting snake or cockroach in the darkness corner of my room, which has been there since not long ago, is still there. I'm not sure as I'm having trouble focusing eyes on anything that spots in the room. I feel very dehydrated, but less so than before. Coconut water helped a lot. I was getting overhydrated. I can't remember how much water I drank in the last 11 hours, possibly 6 litres. Feeling less flu sick by this point, but more mild hangover sick. 15 hours and 40 minutes.
You're on your own.
Time dilation is gone for sure now. I can't tell if the cockroach is still there in the dark corner, if it's just a vision memory. I still can't focus on some of the dark things in my room. I hear very faint breathing in the corner of my room. I'm still getting the occasional tingle. I don't see any trail of it, even in the dim lights. But emotional effects increase with doing so. I'm tired, but not nearly as exhausted as before. 15 hours and 45 minutes. I hear distant talking in the corner of my room, but only for 5 seconds. 16 hours and 30 minutes. I'm still feeling residual emotional effects and the occasional tingle or pinprick. 17 hours and 30 minutes. Feeling mostly sober now. Sudden rush of energy. The trip is over. After reviewing and editing my notes, I now know that I remembered everything in perfect clarity. This trip went pretty much exactly as I expected from my research, aside from the duration not being related linearly with dosage. Conclusion. Benzidamine is not a recreational drug. Being delirious is not fun. I did not enjoy my trip. I cannot possibly fully describe all of the terrifying things I saw during my trip, but I will remember it all forever.
Sentry turret established.
A 1000 milligram MDMA trip report, sent in by Cole. I've just watched your video about you sharing your experience tripping on MDMA/MDA, and until now, I thought we were the only one who experienced such a thing. Your video prompted my research into what happens, and also inspired me to share my trip report with you. So here goes. Me and my friend got hold of some 350 milligram MDMA ecstasy tablets. These are some of the strongest pingers I've ever come across, and they really pack a punch. So, me and my friend decided we'd venture into our city, Birmingham, which is one train ride away from where we live, and spend the evening getting pingers just for the sake of it, really. At this point, I'm at the beginning of my rave phase, and have taken pingers about 5 times on separate occasions before this night. Once we arrived in Birmingham, we headed straight for the Weatherspoons, where I dropped a full pill, and she dropped half. The following 2 hours were pretty standard, and nothing extraordinary happened, so I'll skip to the good part. Once I start to come down, I'm thinking to myself that I'm nowhere near ready to go home yet, so I have the wise idea of dropping 2 more. So at this point, 1000 milligrams of MDMA has been consumed, but the first pill had pretty much worn off, so I wouldn't consider it a full 1000 milligram dose. I'm really starting to feel the come up at this point, and my eyes just can't stop dying around. My body is rushing, and my emotions are flying high. We decide to sit down on a bench outside Tesco car park. The road in front of us consisted of small, 7-foot trees planted at regular intervals between the 2 lanes. One of these trees, however, was broken and lying slightly on its side. It was at this point that my vision began. I stared at this tree to see it suddenly split and raised open
thinking, what fucking pincers? It's a tree, you knob. But I assure you, this tree completely transformed into a lobster right before my eyes. I'm in pure shock at the 7-foot lobster, which is just standing there, waving its pincers and moving left and right and vertically, as if it's doing some sort of Hawaiian dance. I ask my friend what the fuck is going on over there, and she tells me that it's just a tree. I look away to see if anything else is changing forms, but nothing. Only this one specific tree had taken on another form, and everything else was completely normal. When I look back, now the lobster is even more detailed. I can see eyes and a face, and it begins to move towards me. At this point, we decide to get up and go into the Tesco car park, which is lit up with lights since it's night time at this point. We sat down against the wall, and I realise how totally fucked I am. Everything is unreal, and I'm seeing heads peek over the tops of all the parked cars, and then dipping back down immediately, almost like a game of whack-a-mole. This proceeded for another 20 minutes until I decided to get an Uber home and go to bed. In bed is when I fully peaked, and my hallucinations really took off. I lay with my eyes closed, only to be greeted with a wave of sound in my ears. I can hear voices, some familiar, some not. I heard the sound of the city, car alarms, my mother shouting my name, and a whole range of other things which I cannot recall. I remember laying there and thinking how truly amazing it is that my brain was able to conjure up such a original sound. And I wasn't really in fear either. However, the sound was so overwhelming that I had to open my eyes to give my brain another sense to fuck with. So I do exactly that. And when I open my eyes and look at my ceiling, what I saw would stick with me forever. Demon faces would appear out of the ground and fly inches away from my face, sort of how Voldemort is portrayed when he apparates. These demons are buzzing around the room. I can hear them screaming and shouting hellish cries. I look at my desk, and the lobster returns. A repeating hallucination was made for me. I was happy to see the lobster, and when I tried to get closer to it, it suddenly turned into a 6-foot Chinese dragon and started circling my bed. I saw the fire it was breathing, and the scales on its body. Its tongue drooped out of its mouth as it performed a show for me, flying around my room in the most interesting patterns I have seen. This experience was something brand new to me, since I'd only taken acid once before this, and only experienced melting and kaleidoscopic effects, as opposed to seeing creatures and beings in my room like in an MDMA. Somehow, I was able to find my way to sleep during this time, and so the experience was over. What inspired me to send you this was watching your personal MDMA trip report. I was in pure shock at the similarities, not only between our trips, but the story itself. I was in 6th form at the time going for an identical phase as you, raving and pinging almost every weekend until I'm out. This is the first time I've actually heard someone have visuals like me on MDMA. I always ask people at raves, and it seems it's very rare for one to have such a trip like ours in MD. I hope you found the story interesting, and I apologise for my lack of writing techniques. Happy tripping. Cole. 95 milligrams intramuscular for the Evil Wizard. A 5-MeO DMT trip report by Evil Wizard, uploaded to earwig.org April 20, 2014. I've been refining DMT for years, but only once did I actually get high smoking it. I had to vaporize a gram or so. Smoking 5-MeO DMT never got me anywhere, vaporizing up to 60 milligrams over an evening. Acid was a gateway drug. I've done my acid, done the 2Cs, 4-ACO DMT, did 80 milligram once, 4-HOMET, and a dozen other popular research chemicals. I've handled myself well over the past 20 years. I know the line between use and abuse, and I'm respected in my scene as a trusted name in drugs. My girl and I had IM'd NN-DMT before. It's 1 milligram over a kilogram each, so I got 95 milligrams and she got 45 milligrams. I had a pleasant time with entities wheeling machinery into the room and showing me things. I could still walk around and recognise the apartment. There were just other entities there as well. I did a nitrous balloon and zoomed into the micro level where the animistic spirits in the walls and ceiling became evident.
Crowds of elves were walking by, wondering where I'd come from, and what I was doing with that balloon. I was like, don't judge me, bro. She wound up going down a wormhole and getting tortured for a past life indiscretions. It lasted about 30 minutes with no real hangover. So, without nearly enough research, we IM'd the same amounts of 5-MeO DMT, reasoning that we could not be as strong by weight. Iroquois note. The dose described in this report is very high, potentially beyond Iroquois' heavy range. It could pose serious health risks or result in unwanted extreme effects. Sometimes extremely high dosage reported errors rather than actual doses used. Yep, I IM'd 95 milligrams of 5-MeO DMT. We did this in my apartment above the funeral home I work at. Yes, there were bodies downstairs. Within minutes, the power came on me in waves. I would be pushed out of my body, then return for a deep breath. I was slumping on the couch with no muscle control, lolling and grinning. It came in waves, where we'd be forced from our bodies while nodding off like on a GHB high, where you just black out for a second and then jerk back awake. I kept repeating, just remember to breathe. I was uncertain that I would live, and felt that I was blacking out from blood loss. Reality was quivering, and the visuals were blowing my mind. Shit was going on heavily. Ghosts stood around, pantomiming the needle injection and suggesting tourniquets. I thought they were paramedics who were finding my body and was wondering why they weren't helping. I could hear them calling my name. I have hemophilia, a clotting disorder. I thought that I was bleeding from needle holes. I resigned myself to my mistake and my death, and I simply let go. I then found myself in a green field that went on forever, filled with some of those self-dribbling elf balls. They were each humming their own little tone, and they were all connected to each other. They were very comforting. It was so nice. Like being cuddled by bunnies. Totally reassuring and peaceful. My identity, or ego, was less than it was before. I felt that these were the Elysium fields out of Greek mythology. Gradually, I connected with each elf or soul. I felt that these were souls that had completed their karmic turns. As they each turned their attention to me, I saw a golden spiral, pie chart. I contemplated life's big mysteries, and as I solved each one, the chart filled in. I could hear them discussing my progress and supporting me. After the last mystery was solved, the spiral became a circle. The entire universe and everyone in it resolved into a single thing, and I felt the truth that we are all one. The circle, or universe, from the tone, and I knew it. This felt like the near-death experiences I read about where you are greeted by an all-encompassing light, genius, or whatever. The elves seemed really impressed that I had managed to get here, and I figured this out without dying. They cheered and gave me a slow clap. I knew that I would live and could return here any time. I came out of the deep delirium and was still on the couch. There were still ghosts about and spirals and vortices spinning in the air. I could tell I was back in the funeral home, but the visuals were astounding. I looked at my girl, and she was seized up, twisted to one side, but limp in the body. I was too messed up to take a pulse, but she looked dead. I could not see her soul inside her body, so I shook her and freaked out, looking for some way to save her, a tourniquet or something. I felt like a failure. My anatomical training was for naught. I'd killed my friend and lover. A previous girlfriend had OD'd from an opiate injection while away on a trip. My life and career were over. I was clearly a degenerate weirdo who had killed someone with my fascination with psychedelics, despite my expertise. I tried mouth to mouth, but her muscle tension was too great. I wrapped a plastic spine and skull around my bicep, Halloween beer bong, thinking that this counted at least for style points, and went racing down the stairs, pantless. I opened the door and urged the paramedics inside, but they were just ghosts. So 60 minutes after injecting, I ran outside, into the funeral home parking lot. I retained enough sense of irony to realise this looked like a drug freak out. I was still blessed out in the love of life. I thought I could crawl into bed with my neighbour employer and he would help me save the girl's life. I tried entering the garage of the funeral home, but it was locked. The cars on the street seemed menacing. So I stood in the middle of the parking lot for a
Exfil Hill is
moment.
ready to go.
The evil wizard, pantless in the summer night, spine as a tourniquet. All doors closed to me after I'd just solved the mystery of life. I went inside and called 911 and asked for medical attention. I told them we'd done way too much DMT. They kept asking questions, but I left the phone to go check my notes on the coroner that I made before dosing something weird. My girl walks out of the bathroom, alive and very pissed. I'm happy to see her alive, and I calm down. However, at this point, we're both convinced that we have brain damage. We're sitting on the carpet and the visuals are going wild. In this moment, I'm totally zen, ready for paramedics to come and pull us out of there. Any repercussions are irrelevant. I am existentially wiped out after all this. I think my advice to accept her. Staying with her in our future, burnt out junkie fashionistas. Perhaps I could be working funerals as the town idiot. I realise I will likely face criminal charges for the substances involved, but que sera sera. 911 calls back, and she realises the cops are coming. Fortunately, she goes into emergency mode and harasses me into leaving, so they don't enter the apartment. I drop the lights, put on pants, shoes, hat, grab my ID and keys, still talking to ghosts as well, and lock up the apartment and car. I confront the weirded out paramedics on the sidewalk, tell them I'm having a panic attack and needing an allergic reaction to a legit mess. They coerce me into the ambulance into the hospital. I'm coming down from all this and talking sense, although my pupils are still salted and my heart rate is 160. My blood pressure is also massive and my CO2 counts are high. They took all sorts of readings. I walked home 2 hours after injecting. She was waiting for me outside the apartment and did not hate me anymore. I realised that we had pulled through this massive ordeal. We took some Valium and slept. I worked a half day and my boss was totally unaware of the situation. My nerves were shot, but I felt so grateful that we were alive. My body felt great as well. I had left it, and when I returned, it felt slightly different. My sexual excitement was heightened. My appetite for food, music and sex, all amplified. I felt great, and I wanted to go back into that space. I really did, and still do. But I'll be playing with small doses, combined with NMDMT perhaps, and potentiating them with associatives like 3-MeO, PCP and nitrous from now on. I felt that NMDMT was more about the entities and 5-MeO was more about itself. I like to make the comparison that NN is the grace and 5-MeO is the power. That fits. I really should have had a babysitter. I risked our lives and careers and freedom for this. Although, I think a babysitter would have freaked out seeing us convulsing, unresponsive and not breathing. If I had a ventilator and something to calm my heart, I would do a dose almost as large at some point in my life. I'd do it somewhere safe, fully clothed, with a sitter and away from my domicile. As near-death experiences go, this beats the car crashes or illnesses I've experienced. I'm a mortician because I feel that death is life's greatest mystery, and I'm trying to get close to death to understand life in the universe. Now I know that solving the secret of life is as simple as dying. All matter and all beings are one eternal thing. Screw synthetic marijuana. First time, heavier hallucinations than any other substance I've ever encountered. It has been about 9 years since this trip, but I remember it as clearly as if it had happened last night. It was the first and only time I have ever experienced full open-eye visuals that had little to no relevance to the world around me. I believe it was a JWH derivative, but I can't be certain. It was a relaxed setting for the trip. 3 buddies and I were out in the woods at night behind a house one of them lived at, sitting on some of those reclining pool chairs. I was young and dumb, smoking out of a bent-in Monster Energy can. I didn't feel anything for the first 4 hits, so I stupidly kept taking bigger and bigger hits each time. It wasn't until my friend passed me the can to take a 5th hit that shit hit the fan for real. In a blink of an eye,
Everything in the world faded to black except for him. He stood up and slowly started to turn green and bulk up like the Hulk, but once he hit full size, blood started to flow from every part of his body. It was coming out as sweat, streaming out of his eyes, openly flowing from his nose, mouth and ears until he was nothing but blood. As fast as this hallucination started, it ended and he was back to sitting beside me trying to pass me the can. So I took the can and had another hit, probably because I have a big dick. I went to pass it to my friend on my left when the same fade to black thing started to happen. I watched him stand and proceed to laugh the most evil and cynical laugh I've ever heard. Slowly, I watched as his skin started to turn colours and break open, rotting on his bones till it started to fall to the earth. His flesh sunk into the soil, where a tree started to grow at an extremely fast rate. When it was done, it was a 25-foot tall weeping willow. It was about this time that the fog started to roll in behind him and the tree with gravestones appeared in the distance. He gave me one last laugh and then proceeded to rip off his appendages one by one, hanging them on nooses created by rope-like limbs of the tree beside him. Much like before, as fast as it started it had ended, and I was back to sitting with my friends, with my buddy on my left asking why I wouldn't let go of the can. Apparently he had been trying to take it while I was in this hellish trip.
Good effect on target.
Around this time I told everyone that I felt the need to go back inside, mainly because fuck mosquitoes and uncomfortable chairs. I stood up to lead the pack back to the house, but all the blood rushed from my head and created another hallucination. I was in a trench surrounded by dead bodies. I looked up over the edge to see barbed wire and an open field behind me, with people shooting from an opposing trench. At that time, a man who appeared to be of Asian heritage came running across no man's land. He took a knee and promptly shot me in the head, which caused me to fall backwards. Back to reality, I'm lying in the pool chair again, with my friends asking if I'm alright, until I just stood up and collapsed back down. I told them I was fine, but still wanted to go inside. I believed them they were gone. They had left me deep within the forest by myself. I started to hear things all around me, see things ducking into the shadows every time I tried to get a good look at them. I pulled out my knife about the same time I saw what was making these noises. They were tribal pygmy people, about a foot tall, brandishing small knives and spears, obviously on the hunt. This is the only point I do not fully remember. I somehow made it out of the forest. The day after this we went and looked and I apparently hacked away at several small trees with a dull butterfly knife. But back to that night, I'd made it through the forest but I was still feeling the cold wind in the house. Don't ask me why, but my only idea as to how to pass it was to walk over the ground and slowly try to walk across the water like Jesus. After about 5 minutes of doing this, I finally realised I could just walk around the pool. So I entered the house to see my friends watching Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I had never seen before. I came to the conclusion that I was just hallucinating about transvestite vampires or something. I decided to lie down on the bottom bunk of my friend's bunk bed. I got really comfortable at first, but then decided that I wanted to talk to my friends, so I attempted to sit up. As much as I tried this, I couldn't seem to sit up whatsoever. In a split second, I found myself looking down at my body from the top corner of the room. I thought, well, at least I can see when I can't sit up. I tried with all my might to control my body, considering I wasn't currently in it at the moment. I saw my back lift off of the bed about an inch, but there seemed to be some sort of muscle connecting my back to the bed. I sat up with more and more force, stretching and eventually ripping the muscle. Blood started to flow onto the bed and shoot across the walls, making all my friends stand and start screaming. My friend's mum runs in hearing them and starts screaming herself. She pulls out her phone and starts to talk to a police dispatcher asking for an ambulance. At this time I popped back into my body, fully sitting up, but my friends were back to sitting down as calm as can be, watching the television. No blood, no screaming, no panicking mothers calling 911. I sat and looked at my friends for a few moments, taking in that everything I had witnessed was a hallucination. Then I saw that none of them had any joints in their bodies. There was literally a 3-inch gap where there should have been their necks, elbows, wrists, hips, etc., with 5 strings coming up from them as if they were puppets. I looked up to see that the ceiling was gone, and instead there was a giant white hand with a string connected to every finger for each person. Once the hand realised that I could see them, they released the strings and vanished. In doing so, my friends fell on the ground. Slowly, these strings started to move on their own accord, forming into a web on the opposing wall from me. The fallen bodies of my friends started to shake, then bolted up to their hands and feet, with their backs to the ground, but with their heads turned 180 degrees to where they could look at me correctly. They then started to crawl upon the web made by the strings like spiders, all staring at me. And then, back to reality. They are all sitting exactly as they were, still steadily watching TV. This time I realised I became extremely nauseous, so I run outside and puked. I walked back inside and get some water, and then went and laid back down and fell asleep. This concludes my first and only
Shadow People, a DPT trip report, posted by Morning Glories and Theory.org, April 18, 2003. October 2001, 30 milligrams DPT. I carefully weighed out 100 milligrams of N,N-dipropyltryptamine hydrochloride and dissolved in 2 milliliters of distilled water. It was very difficult to get the DPT to dissolve, and I found it necessary to add a little heat to get into the solution. I then filtered the liquid through a .02 micron filter for stability. After transferring the solution to a sealed glass ampoule for storage, I measured out 0.6 milliliters of this solution, which of course was equivalent to 30 milligrams of DPT. This was my first experience with intramuscularly administered DPT, and I rightfully decided to start with what I viewed as a low dose. I was never one to enjoy snorting odd-smelling powders. I was anxious to try DPT by a new method of administration. Though I was a bit nervous about the injection process, I was looking very forward to comparing the effects of IMing this material to insufflating it. Those I've spoken with who have taken it both ways swear by the intramuscular method. Plus, DPT was always administered by IM injection, but it was initially researched as a psychotherapeutic tool in the 70s, so it seems to be a well-explored manner of administration. Using my trusty automatic injecting device, I administered the 30 milligrams until I could arrive. There was no burn and the injection went smoothly. No immediate effects were noted. I decided to spend the onset of the experiment outside, so I packed myself a bowl of marijuana, brought 1 balloon of nitrous oxide with me and made my way outdoors. For an evening in October in the Midwest, it was unusually warm. There was not a cloud in the sky and also very little humidity. After 10 minutes, there still was nothing happening, so I decided to smoke some pot, figuring it would help kick in the effects. 2 or 3 hits was all it took. After the marijuana was consumed, I noted the distinct DPT vibration in my body. The night sky was suddenly filled with colours, and there seemed to be life and activity stirring about in the trees. I was amazed at the relative smoothness of IM DPT. Previous experiments of insufflated DPT were very forceful and demanding in nature. In some ways, this was actually gentle, or at least during the onset of the experience it was. Around 15 minutes into the experiment, the effects seemed well developed, and I decided to take my balloon of nitrous oxide. As usual, the effects were overwhelming. I can only describe the place I travelled to as serene. There was complete silence as the universe and I became
lasted about 3 minutes, though I had no perception of time as this event occurred. It was on my return that things got a little weird. As soon as I became aware of my body again, I noted a strangeness in the air. I couldn't quite place my finger on what it was so weird, but there was a certain foreboding feeling in the air, almost as though I was no longer alone. I decided to gather my things and make my way back inside. The walk down to my room was a little difficult. My motor control was a little off, and I seemed to sway as I walked. The visuals had also grown quite intense. It was actually a little difficult to see clearly over the intense trails and colours that filled my perceptual field in the dim light I was walking through. I put on Donovan's Please Don't Bend, which is a very beautiful acoustic ballad with a biting edge to it. A very intense song. What happened next is beyond my ability to describe rationally. It's definitely the sort of event that is completely unbelievable unless you experience it firsthand. As soon as I sat down on my couch, there was this creature, this entity or being that was there with me. It sat directly behind me in the couch and started to massage my scalp. It shaped in a humanoid fashion. I could not make out any specific features because I could not turn around and examine it. I was paralysed with fear, and I did not attempt to intervene or stop it from happening at all. I just sat there and let it do what it wanted to do. I'm not in a position to say any of this was a figment of my mind. Not only could I clearly detect the presence of someone or something there with me, but I could also feel his hands in my hair, and my hair was also visibly moving. There was certainly no wind or breeze in the breaking moving my hair in the fashion it was. The entity event seemed to end as soon as it began. This occurrence was over by the time the song ended. The experience of having my scalp moved by a presence I was not used to left me rather unnerved. I spent the remainder of the trip attempting to put the pieces back together and figure out just what happened. For the next hour or so, I rode out the waves of fear and uncertainty that I was feeling, knowing the effects of the DPT would soon wane. Though I never reached a safe fallout path, it was not a comfortable trip after this event. I did not expect to have entity contact from a mere 30 milligrams of DPT, and I suppose I was in a bit of a shock from the whole thing. By the third hour, I was mostly calm. It was just my body that was sleeping. A few days later, I visited my local wise lady, who was a Native American, and she seemed to know exactly what it was. It's a shadow person, she said while laughing. That's what we do.
The enemy of my enemy
They
is the
massaged the
enemy.
scalp. Did me no harm. My friend was really convinced that's what it was, and said my description of what happened fitted the bill completely. She has had 3 such encounters herself with deep meditation, and says many Native American legends speak of beings that she feels are what we both have encountered. She did not know exactly what shadow people were or where they came from, but did offer a few theories. The most reasonable of which I thought was shadow people exist to comfort us. They touch us to provide us their means of bringing soothing feelings. I guess that is what it was. And with that, I'm satisfied. Truly, that could go down in my books as one of the strangest events I've experienced. I've had entity contact from smoke DMT, but nothing like this. Not direct physical contact. I also believe that the DPT may have been a catalyst in this event, but it was not the cause. Though I cannot even begin to decipher the meaning of it. Hopefully in the future, this mystery will reveal itself to me.
I don't know what that was, but it looked painful.
The Consequence of Ignorance. The Dachura Trip Report by Shiggy Schley. Posted to Irwin.org March 13, 2010. Before I begin the actual story of the trip, I'd like to give you, the reader, a look at what happened leading up to the time of ingestion. It won't take long. It gives you a better understanding of how my entire personality changed due to the ingestion of the drug. I was at my cousin's house with a friend. For now, we'll call my cousin Mark and a friend Mo. We showed up at Mark's house at about 9. I met Mo there and we ended up taking turns at playing SOCOM in the living room, ripping on each other for no apparent reason.
Looks like force. Smells like a
Me
crash
and Mo
party.
went into the bedroom, because there was cable in there, and he wanted to ask me something in particular. He asked me if I wanted to get messed up. I was always down, but we had to walk somewhere to get them. We then walked out, rode our bikes down to Main Street, and picked a few seed pods of something we had no idea the origin of. We headed back to the house, and throwing caution to the wind, I took 2 pods full of seeds and a glass of water. Him being much smaller and never having any experience of any kind of drugs, I only took 1. Mo weighs only about 140 pounds. It only seemed right that he took a smaller dose than I. I then lay down on the bed and stared up at the spinning ceiling fan. From this point on, I'm going to tell you what I remember and what witnesses told me had happened. About 20 minutes after ingestion, I started feeling strange. I felt good though. I thought it was similar to the effects of smoking marijuana, but it really wasn't. The only similarity between the two is all of a sudden I had bad cotton mouth. I got a glass of water and went outside to check if I could find any snuff in the tree. He did, and I put in a pinch of Copenhagen. At this point, I felt very odd. I was stumbling around and slurring my words, sweating more than usual for the current temperature. I couldn't handle the small chew I had, and started to gag because of the extreme lack of moisture in my mouth. I took it out, stumbled back into the house and grabbed another glass of water. Went back into the bedroom and lay down on the bed, watching the ceiling fan once again. All of a sudden, a hazy purple spot started appearing on the ceiling. I was intrigued by this, so I stayed and watched them for a while. After ingestion, roughly 1 hour, Mo entered the room and asked if it was okay to turn the lights off. I had my fill of a purple haze, so I agreed to the blackout. I closed my eyes, like a laser shot. Images of random objects drifted in and out of sight, while circular designs danced in the background. From here on, what I remember will be in quotes, and what happened I have no recollection of will be in stars. The following will be in chronological order to the best of my abilities. At this point, I was drenched in sweat, so I was inclined to take off my shirt. I then went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face, and ended up completely undressing.
Max,
I had no idea where Mo was, nor what he was doing. I was naked in the bathroom, and I started throwing punches. Hard punches. I was boxing anything in the bathroom that wasn't bolted down. According to Mark, my uncle was awoken by the noise and got up to check. All of a sudden, I was shirtless in the living room, sitting on the couch looking up at Mark and my parents.
En la cabeza.
Not sure of where I was at all. All I did was what my parents asked me to, which was put on my shoes and shirt and get in the car. I got up to walk out the door. I was driven back to my house in the country. I'm not sure what words were exchanged between me, my mother and my father, but I doubt there were any at all. I came to on another couch, mine, looking up at my father, who didn't look particularly disappointed, but more amused at my odd and silly behaviour. I kept on having this sudden urge to get up, yet every time I attempted to, my father's stern voice chimed in saying, "Stay down, don't get up." I kept trying and he started to laugh as every time I got up, I'd sheepishly sit down. I felt like I was 9 years old, doing as I was told while I was sent to my room, or worse, crawling. After many attempts, I thought I'd go at it at a different angle. I had to pay him, so he looked at me with a warm smile and took my hand and helped me to the bathroom. I felt secure for some reason. I wasn't able to stand, so as I sat, my dad snickered in the doorway. I looked up at him again, wondering why I kept feeling younger and more helpless as the time passed. "I can't go. Stop worrying," he said. He then helped me up and put me back on the couch. I sat and strained my ears to hear the conversation going on between him and my mother. I kept hearing horrifying words like "dad," "the hospital," "overdose." It's important to note at this point that in the crazy religion my family is part of, I don't go to the doctors whatsoever, failing in healing through prayer. As if there was talk of a hospital visit, something bad was happening. I remember my father coming back in from the kitchen and taking me down.
Get to the helo.
I was rushed to the neighbouring town's hospital. Most parents did the same, and we arrived at the same time. I was rushed in there for at least well, they tried to stick me in place. After the 5th attempt, the floor was spotted with blood, and something being pumped through my veins. I was being extremely violent. At one point, I even punched the doctor in the face and broke his glasses. This is when they decided that it would be best for me and other people's safety if I was restrained. I was tied to a bed and force-fed charcoal. It was not an easy task, but after about an hour they had it done. I was given a new IV with some other kind of medical bullshit in it to calm me down. With my face, chest and neck covered in black coal residue, I finally found sleep. I came to with people surrounding me. It was a new day and peculiar things were happening. My grandmother, who does not smoke, was holding a lit cigarette. I had my sister lean down to ask her if she was smoking. She responded with a simple, "No, jackass, Grandma doesn't smoke." I looked around the room to see where I was and why I was tied down. A white board on the opposite wall read, "You're in the hospital, you're okay. It's the current date, no one is going to hurt you." The nurse apparently did this because during my blackouts, I was violent, quixotic, and angry. I looked around the room for some familiar faces and found some. My whole family was there. While restrained, I was able to look under my blanket. I was fully naked, and there was a tube coming out of my penis. I found this odd because I'd never been to a hospital and had no idea what a catheter even was. I looked up at my IV bag and it was an ear of corn. It started growing features and it soon became an ear of corn with a face. My father then asked what I was looking at, and I turned to address him confidently. "Cornhead," I said with a very serious look. I looked around the room at all the odd things happening around me. A money clip with a $10 bill in it was laying next to a small fish on the ceiling. I thought this was amazing, so I had to tell the nearest person about it. Once again, this was my sister. She looked up like the dumbass she is and said there was nothing there. I asked my mother if this sexy bondage was really necessary. She laughed and untied my hands. My feet were still restrained though at this point. All of a sudden, the room fell away around me, and I was once again back at Mark's house. I had a PS2 controller in my hand playing SOCOM. 5 minutes of playing had passed, and the controller melted into a soft cotton material. I kept on apologising to Mark, saying, I'm so sorry, over and over again. I opened my eyes and I was back in the hospital. The controller was now a blanket, which I was clutching very tightly in my hands. I felt scared and vulnerable and began to weep. Everyone that was close to me came and bid their well wishes. They chatted with me, or tried to chat with the nonsense coming out of my mouth, and promptly left. I came to, and it was dusk. My sister approached me and gave me a hug, took my shoes off of me. She had to lift the blanket a bit to get them, and I thought she was going to expose my naked body to the few people still in the hospital room. No, don't look under there. They took my clothes and stuffed me in a dark tube, I said. She had a laugh and said she had to go, and did just that. It was dark again now. I drifted in and out of consciousness for the better part of an hour. My aunt was at my bedside, and all of a sudden, large centipedes and bugs started coming out of her ears. I was distraught, so I turned my attention to anything but her. The bugs had now filled the room, and were crawling over everything. I screamed for help, and my mother came to comfort me. She embraced me and told me to close my eyes. I cried, hard. Then, I slept. I woke up a bit later. No more than half an hour had actually passed. And then something caught my eye. A naked woman outside my window, dancing. She was beautiful. I remember telling myself, as soon as my mum's asleep, I'm going out there and fucking the shit out of her regardless of this catheter. I passed out before she did, and now I realise it was obviously a hallucination. I awoke the next day to more well wishes. Then there was Boxy. Boxy was a gnome about the size of my thumb. He'd climbed down from the curtainer of my bed and posted up on my shoulder. He reminded me of the Travelocity gnome. I was captivated. I had the most excited look on my face as he smiled at me. Then he winked and mouthed, "Watch this," and then started to jump up and down on my shoulder. I was overjoyed and started chanting, "Jump, Boxy, jump," to the enjoyment of my current audience. I was out of it. I said things to my family that I'm not proud of. Told my grandmother to eat a dick. Told my aunt she needed to get fucked hard. And I called my other grandmother a whore. I then went out of it again. The walls melted away and I was in my room holding my guitar. I started playing and once again, it melted into a blanket. I was angry. I threw a fit. Kept repeating, "Fuck, fuck, what the fuck?" More well wishes came, more cards and more bullshit. I came to and it was night. I looked to the window and the woman was gone. In her place was a large man in a long trench coat and fedora. He looked at me and pulled out an old 50s Thompson. He began firing through the window and I lost it. I hysterically started crying, but again, my mother was there to comfort me. I fell asleep in her embrace. I awoke the next day and felt normal again. No hallucinations, no mad psychobabble, just normality. The nurse came in and deflated the balloon in my catheter and pulled it out, which hurt like a motherfucker. I was able to clothe myself, get up and walk to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and had black all over me. It was like I was the first one to pass out at the party, and someone had found a Sharpie. I met Mo at the facility shower, and then told me all the bad things that he saw in his dream. He awoke to his room full of dead bodies, hanging on nooses from the ceiling. I felt bad for him. I felt bad for both of us. We had taken Datura, Jimson, without researching the facts, and paid dearly for it. I'd lost 3 days of my full break and hours of my life I had no recollection of. The reason I was in the hospital for so long is because my heart almost exploded because of how bad it was. I hope that by writing this, that I've helped inform you in some way.
Sleepwalking. A Diamond Hydrogenate trip report by Dramamine, uploaded to earwid.org on April 3rd, 2008. At the beginning of this year, I was too broke to buy weed regularly, so I'd resorted to smoking cigarettes like crazy and DXM. I was looking for something a bit more interesting than the usual disorientation of DXM. The Modest Mouse song Dramamine. I thought, hell, sounds cool to me. Big mistake. Wish I'd heard this side then. Not that it was a horrible trip, I just wish I'd known what was getting into. My friend and I drove up to CVS and bought a box of Dramamine later that night. At my own house, all alone in my room, I took the pills. The first few were nasty as crap, so I went downstairs and used Sunny D as a chaser. Went back upstairs, turned the light on and began reading a Motor Trend. After 45 minutes, I was wondering when I thought this was going to happen. Just then, the words blurred on the page, followed moments later by the entire magazine disappearing. It was scaring the living shit out of me. I looked to the ground and found the magazine, picked it up, put it aside and turned out the lights. I turned on the Modest Mouse CD. This is a long drive for someone with nothing to think about. The first track of which is Dramamine, an appropriate song. I put the clicker down and realised I had to pee. So I got up and walked down the hall, still fairly lucid, minus the blurred vision. I ran into every door in the 20 feet to my bathroom. It was pitch black and I couldn't see a damn thing. I finally made it in there and turned on the light, when I heard my dad yell something about being quiet. He was trying to sleep. I pissed and went back to bed. I did the same thing about 8 more times. Never actually pissing those times though. Once I was done peeing, I went back to my bed and turned the lights out again. I looked over at my stereo and hit play again as the CD had ended. That's when I saw my dad behind my stereo bugging me. I yelled at him to stop, and he just stared blankly at me as I yelled at him. Finally I heard him from the other room when he yelled, "Shut up!" It was about 2 in the morning at this point. His image in my room wisped away like a cloud of smoke. Very disturbing. At this point, people started walking into my room. People I didn't know. People from all eras of time. People who looked dead. Like a walking zombie or something. People who looked quite alive as well. All sorts of people. All walking into my room and crawling under my bed. As with any time I see dead people walking, I pee my pants. Though the 8 trips to the toilet would have cleaned me out, but no, I peed my pants. I was too afraid to go above my room and feared letting my legs anywhere near the bottom of my bed. I feared that hands would grab them. After about an hour, at least that's what it felt like, I decided that it was safe to stop standing on my bed with a pillow in his defence. Then I saw my dog at the side of my bed. I was wondering how they got in my room with the door being closed. Then again, that didn't stop all those people. So why I found it strange that my dog got in there, I have no idea. I leaned over to pet her, and as my hand touched it, she whisked away like smoke. In much the same manner as my father had. Got under my sheets and held me tightly. I was freaking out. Completely freaking insane feeling. Then I got thirsty, so I went downstairs and was met by my mother, who assumed I was sneaking out. The conversation went something like this. This is how she'd been told it to me in the morning. I have no recollection of this actually happening. Mum, what do you think you were doing? Me. I need water. You're not sneaking out. I'm wearing my boxers only. No, I'm not sneaking out at all. What's with you? You're acting weird. Oh, nothing. I need water. Okay. She reaches for a glass and hands it to me, only to take it away shortly afterwards and shaking so much. Then she filled it up for me. Me. I need Pepsi. It sounded funny. Okay. She hands me the Pepsi, and it's in a wrapper I've never seen before. One that looks just like the wrapper the Dramamine pills come individually wrapped in. I came to, I remember from here on out at that moment. I looked in my hand and thought the pill was a Dramamine. I remember thinking, oh shit, she's caught me. I'm fucked. So I turned around and began walking upstairs with my hand clenched tightly and the water in the other hand. Mum, where are you going? Me. Bed. What's in your hand? Nothing. Are you on a drug? Nah. Are you sleepwalking? Yeah, that's it. I'm sleepwalking. Okay, just go to bed and don't get back out tonight. You've been making a racket all night. Holy crap, I was totally flipped out at that point. Went back to my room and attempted to fall asleep. I found that the more I thought about nothing, the more I thought about everything. The next hour or so I remember thinking about everything, but not in words. It was nothing that I could even begin to put into text. It was the most powerful thought I have ever experienced. I learned more in that hour or so than I have in my entire life. Everything fell into place. Everything just made sense. Nothing in the world has looked quite the same since. The beautiful looks more beautiful. The hideous, more hideous. It's just simply the most incredible experience of my life. From what I have read about other people's experiences, they experience much the same scary hallucinations, but no one else seems to have experienced the deep session of thought that I have. That was when Dramamine was enjoyable and outright euphoric, just for the sheer amount of knowledge I gained, just from deep thought. The hallucinations are extremely realistic and actually pretty cool in retrospect. It was not cool at the time, however. The scariest experience of my life that was offset by the most amazing euphoric thinking of my life. Not the greatest drug, was overall worth it, I guess. Jungleberry. The synthetic marijuana triple from Shroomery. Shit fucked me up. I'm not quite sure where to begin with this. The weekend started off like any other. Call up some friends, after the Snow Cup, reach destination, proceed to get blitzed. So we're sitting outside of this cafe, quite a few of us, I'd say 8 or maybe 9. The plan was that we were going to have a couple bowls there and then, and go find somewhere to chill to just sit down and have a good time. My friends packed me a bowl of this stuff called Jungleberry, which I guess is sort of similar to the K2 Spice or whatever, and, as per usual, I cane that shit till my lungs are on the verge of combustion. It slowly starts to hit me, but I felt like being ballsy, so I asked for a second bowl not 10 seconds from the last. This is where shit starts to hit the fan. For the next 10 minutes I'm ridiculously fucking high, and then reality starts to warp. Everything is completely black, but not in the way one would think. It wasn't like the colour black, nor the black where you close your eyes. It's the kind of black that exists before you were born, where there is just completely nothing there. Suddenly 2 specks of colour fade in. A red speck and a purple speck. At this point in time, nothing was wrong. Just 2 dots of colour in forever darkness. Now the colour starts to expand and contract, stretch and explode, blend with each other and revert back into dots, and then continue to just go completely insane. It doesn't sound bad, but it was painful. Extremely painful. Why was the rapid expansion and contraction of these 2 colours hurting me? Well, I have no idea. This felt like it was happening for an infinite amount of time. That I was trapped in this pre-life stage with red and purple colours floating around forever. Then, instantly it all vanishes. Now this next part is extremely difficult to explain. My mind, like my consciousness, is trapped in an extremely narrow space. But as before, there was nothing there. Just this pre-life darkness. I had to keep my mind moving forward, for if I stopped or turned around, my mind would be consumed by something. I don't know what it was, but it was just something that would consume my mind. The issue was that as my mind was moving forward through this narrow space, terrifying things were spawning in front of my mind, although there was absolutely nothing there. My mind was extremely hesitant, and thus it would stop or turn around to try and flee, but end up being consumed by this void. Being consumed by this nothing again was indescribably painful. But as my mind was killed, it would be reborn in another narrow space of pre-life darkness. The amount of times my mind died and was reborn, I can't say. It felt like it was lasting forever and just continued to happen. Another transition occurred. This repeating phenomena of pre-life darkness, except this time I was looking at myself from a top-down view. There I was, lying in this darkness, not on any surface, just lying there. Suddenly everything zoomed into the head of myself lying there in fetal position, and I saw myself sitting in a position, the types with rolly wheels and arms. I was tied to it with a thick rope, and I was also in a straitjacket. I began to imagine myself puking. Constantly puking for who knows how long. And I could feel myself puking as well. I did indeed end up waking up covered in puke. Another transition this time. I was doing battle with everything in the universe. And luckily enough, the surroundings weren't pre-life darkness, but I don't know what they were. When I say doing battle with everything in the universe, I don't mean swinging swords at puppies and planets. In fact, I don't know what I mean. It's indescribable. In order to win against this everything, I had to time something right in order to pass. Pass through what? I'm not really sure. Time what right? I don't know again. If I mistimed whatever I had to time correctly, I'd be transported to the pre-life darkness for eternity, and then transported back to try and time whatever it is that I had to time correctly. Eventually I ended up timing it right, after an infinite amount of time in this trip, on which I woke up. But the bad shit doesn't end there. I woke up with absolutely no idea what the fuck had happened to me, where the fuck I was, what life was. I had no idea about anything. Call it 20 minutes of the worst case of amnesia around. It felt like I'd been placed onto this earth by something. But at the very point I woke up from the trip was the very point where I'd been brought into existence. All my friends were panicking, asking me if I was okay. I was busy asking them who the fuck they were, and where the fuck I was, and how the fuck I got here. This lasted for about 20 minutes, until I slowly started to piece reality back together again. Bad idea. A Benadryl trip report uploaded to Shroomery on the 4th of August 2011. Excuse the typing, I'm really stoned. Hey, I'm going to be talking about my first and last time trying Benadryl. I was on this forum during the beginning of the last school year. I think I was 15. I was reading this forum, reading up on shroom trips because I was going to trip soon. Started reading about Benadryl and how it makes you hallucinate, so I thought it would be a good idea to do a low dose of that to prepare for my trip. Now, I know it's not even close to being the same. Shrooms make me feel amazing, and Benadryl makes me feel like I'm in a nightmare. It was like 11 PM on a Tuesday night. I was just really excited to hallucinate for the first time. I took 12 pills, around 300 milligrams. I think I took that knowing it was a little much, but I always felt like I had a natural tolerance for pills. And I read that some people take 200 to 250 milligrams and don't trip, they just fall asleep. At 11 PM, I took them in my room. Went downstairs to make sure everyone is asleep before I trip. Everyone was. So went back in my room and it's been like 10 minutes. I don't really feel anything, just on my laptop and watching TV. It's been like 30 minutes now. I just feel really tired and my stomach kinda hurts, so I decided to roll myself an L. I thought the cannabis might also help me hallucinate. It's been 40 minutes now, and I go out for a smoke. On my first day, the blood all hit me like a train. Everything moved with the jello. I could barely keep my neck up. I wasn't able to move at all. I felt like I was so small, I was trapped in this chair like bait for some creature. After trying to get up for about 5 minutes, I just was too tired, and that's when I saw this huge flying worm in the sky circling me. This whole time, I thought this was real, and I forget I was tripping. All I thought was I just went out for a smoke. So now I'm sitting there, waiting to die by this huge worm. And it couldn't get worse. I was getting swarmed by spiders. I couldn't kill them at all. This went on for what felt like a couple of days, but it was probably only 30 minutes. Finally, the worm came down, its mouth open wide, and it ate me. And I was in its mouth. I came back to reality for a sec. Oh shit, I got to get in my room. So I sneaked back in, stumbling the whole way. I somehow made it back to my room. I don't know how, but for the rest of the night I was trying to watch TV, as my whole family was walking through to my room. At first I was like, what the fuck? And then I was like, oh, I'm tripping. This is gonna happen, innit? It was so weird. They just went in my closet. For some reason after this I couldn't fall asleep. I was just sitting in my room tripping for hours. I finally fell asleep and woke up feeling so weird during the whole school day. So my advice is, don't do Benadryl, like, at all. It's not worth it. dark void I call home. A Mementine trip report by It Stings and It Hurts from Erowid. Date published March 9, 2019. I'd only been home for a few hours after my week-long New Year's trip. I'd been staying with friends, drinking and celebrating the beginning of 2017. Before I knew I wanted to make my first voyage into the Memenverse that night. I'd begun unpacking my bags and cleaning up the house in preparation for the inevitably prolonged and arduous journey that high doses of Memantine would present, before carefully weighing and capping my dose. 150 milligrams of fluffy, crystal white powdered Memantine hydrochloride. Took my dose orally about 7 p.m. Knowing full well the duration these trips go for and how long the onset for the drugs to set intake, I began to occupy myself for the first few hours by cooking myself a light meal before tripping, like I always do. I found eating before taking the dose can slow down the onset even further than what it already is, and with ample time between taking the dose and it finally kicking in, eating in this window is ideal. After I've eaten and sat down to begin browsing Reddit, the fact I've taken the Memantine has almost completely been forgotten by me. I really feel a bit spacey and calm. I light up a cigarette, like after most meals, and notice the slow wisps of smoke dancing around my hand. This is when I remembered about the Memantine, about 2 hours after taking the dose. To really set myself up for a relaxing come-up, I put on Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here album, queuing up a few hours worth of psych rock, alt-electro and anything else I could find that helped guide my self-reflective and calm mindset I was entering. By about 10 p.m, plus 3 hours after dosing, I'd begun to peak. My depth perception had lost all focus. Not quite enough to force double vision, but enough that objects close to me like my laptop or hands felt like they were fluctuating between being hundreds of meters away, making me feel like a giant, or incredibly close to me, feeling like I was somehow a tiny person laying on my bed. The walls had started warping, and the less I focused on my surroundings and more on my laptop and hands, my perception of reality just outside those objects had all but vanished. It was like sitting in a void with only my very immediate surroundings present. At this point I find darkness to let visuals take hold of more. Almost as if letting my mind's imagination of what could be there much more real than my distorted perception of what actually is there. Turn off the lights, only let the faint glow of the half moon from the window illuminate my room. Staring into the darkness, watching as my room transforms into vast cathedrals or otherworldly dimensions, I lose track of time. Although Memantine causes a diminished response to nicotine, I still find the habit of smoking incredible when I'm on my journey. I can pull apart my sense of balance, and in this particular instance, the world began spinning around me and I had no choice but to just sit there and watch it tear apart into a dark, structureless space. Possibly one of the most beautiful experiences I've had on Memantine yet. I lay in that void for what feels like maybe 20 to 30 minutes before it began crashing down around me, and I briefly returned to reality. Memantine tends to come in waves, so these 5 to 10 minute windows of mild sobriety are opportunities for me to go to the bathroom and get water to stay hydrated. Given the duration of Memantine, each trip can give me a lot of particularly interesting experiences, and it would be impossible to explain, or let alone remember every single one of them. But there's still 2 particular events during this trip I want to try and explain. After long periods of laying in the dark, my eyes became very adjusted to seeing very low amounts of light, and at one point after sitting up to stretch I noticed a tiny orange light in the corner of my room. I just sat there staring at it, trying to work out what it could possibly have been, for longer than I care to admit. It began to slide away into the distance, and the more I focused on it, the further it seemed to get. Slowly the room around it turned into a tunnel, funneling all my vision down onto this faint orange dot. The walls had become red tendrils, crawling over each other to get out. Unfazed and calm about being stuck in this hole of this bizarre situation, I started to try and climb towards the dot, to only very abruptly find myself face first off the bed onto the floor. Reality snapped back in around me, and the orange dot was just a light on the charger for my laptop. Duh. The other notable occurrence, a particularly strange and very lifelike visual, was during the very last legs of the trip. I tend to fall asleep about 10 hours into a trip if I start around the same time, 7 PM, and a hypnagogic state of consciousness can be achieved. Memantine tends to be just stimulating enough to keep me awake during most of the peak, and wears off just enough that the visuals can still be present as I'm falling asleep.
Face-off team deathmatch.
I was staring at my wall and my mind had started wandering, watching it swirl and warp different shapes and patterns. But slowly a young girl's face pressed out of the wall. It appeared like she was carved out of clay. Beautiful and calm, long wispy hair, but trapped in the wall. I could see into her eyes, glassy and clear. She was emotionless and never blinking, and her eyes followed me as I leaned over the edge of my bed. I felt like I knew her. Looking back now, I know I had never seen her in my life before. We stared into each other's eyes for several minutes before she slowly sunk back into the wall where she emerged, leaving a dark mist as I finally fell asleep. Waking up around 10 AM, plus 15 hours after dosing, I still felt heavily dissociated. My body still numb and distant. I get up to go pee, stumbling with no sense of balance, and eventually go back to sleep for several hours. Today is plus 48 hours since dosing and I'm still feeling mildly dissociated, tired and uncoordinated. But like usual, it's slowly improving. This is somewhere in the vicinity of my 20th high dose Memantine trip, so it's nothing out of the ordinary, but I don't think I'm used to it yet. Being disconnected from reality for a solid 12 hours is not something one grows accustomed to very easily.
Hostiles reclaimed the lead.
The Desert of the Real. The Salvia Divinorum trip report by Zonka, uploaded to Irwid.org on June 14, 2005. When I ordered the Salvia online, I was at the end of my rope. 7 years of counselling, psych trips, a psych ward and plenty of recovery group work, and I still felt lied to. My world was spiralling out of control. Hell, I'd never been out of control in 7 years. My vices were going to end my life, but I looked and acted just like everyone I knew. I believed I'd given the allopathic model of medicine more than a fair try, and I found it to be worse than worthless. I was desperate. Hadn't even seen a mushroom for that entire time, and didn't know where to look. I remember someone mentioning salvia, so I looked it online and ordered some. During the 3 days it took to arrive, I carved a chillum from hardwood, heat seasoned and oiled it. Even before I got home that day, I knew the salvia would be waiting. I retired to my silent room, towelled the door, cracked the window and loaded it. I took the first hit. I must have misread the description on the order page. I thought it said that smoked salvia took 15 minutes to kick in, and eaten salvia 30 minutes. Imagine my surprise when I blew out the second inhalation and found myself in the twilight zone. My room rippled like fire, like everything was made of fire. I had a fan on in the room and the curtain actually was rippling. The motion caught my eye, and I looked. What a strange sight it was. I saw elfin, smiling faces dancing in the fabric. They beckoned to me enthusiastically, saying, "Come on, tell us about Texas. Tell us about Texas, come on." It seemed really important to me. Actually, I felt far out of my depth, but acting as if I had power gave me power, if you can understand that. "Just a minute," I said. "I'm going to hit this thing again." I managed to draw another toke, but couldn't feel my body when I exhaled. It was more like watching myself in a movie screen. I put the chillum down. All this happened in about a minute. from the first effects to the third total. The little elf guys were still in the curtain when they looked again, and I thought about a lyric in a Clamps track. Spiders in my eyelids and ghosts in the cheese. What in the world's come over me? Lost touch with reality. Well, I figured I was game to tell the elves about Texas, so I tentatively drew back the curtain a couple of inches and saw, to my joy, my cactus plant on the windowsill. I felt myself drawn to the 5-inch gap in the sash while the cacti egged me on. Come on, out here, tell us about Texas. Somehow, while this was going on, I felt the presence of someone in the room. It was as if my housemate had walked in on me to ask me to borrow my something or other, and asked if I was okay. I was so far out that I believed it was possible, even though I couldn't see it. Just to be safe, I said aloud, "If you're standing right in front of me," I couldn't begin to describe this. It also seemed safer not to try to jump out the window, so I closed the curtain and knelt down to pray. I prayed for just and peaceful leaders for 7 generations, for an age of lowered expectations and regrowth, among other things. It was a bit of an effort to concentrate on positivity and hope. As if from within an adjacent room in my mind, I felt muffled violence and saw blurred images of God. Yet for all of that, there on my knees I was safe and in control. The prayer held back the bad vibes. While some part of me was praying and holding back the neighbour's vision, another part was aware of other travellers telepathically. The sudden bizarre high reminded me of bad phrases, obviously, and I felt in contact with mental patients and my shady potted neighbours. I could hear their conversation in my head. I felt like I was near the periphery of sanity, so I prayed for the earth. As I sank below the psychosphere, I felt alone. Isn't that a metaphor for my life? Caring about the earth, feeling alone. I became aware of the presence of a reserved academic being. I felt approval, and may have heard encouraging sounds. It was as if I had bumped into somebody in the shadows, someone who was trying not to call attention to themselves. I felt like I had impressed a beloved teacher. While coming down, I reflected that although most of my mind was distorted and tripping, there was still a deeper consciousness that was unchanged. That was me, kneeling on my bed and praying for the earth to hold it together. I also got a neat little visual special effect of some desert flowers on a poster becoming 3-dimensional. When things calmed down a bit, my straight-laced housemate came home with a date, jumped into bed, and started getting on with her. Holding my position, unmoving, for 10 or so minutes really made my back hurt. Eventually I eased myself down and feigned sleep until I could make a more dignified exit,